All right, everybody, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Thank you, guys. We have a very busy morning, so I want to get us started on time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for many of you who made long drives to be with us today. My name is Laura Lewis Marchino. I'm the Executive Director of Region 9 Economic Development District, and we are also integrating operations with the Southwest Colorado Council of Governments. So I am winging it with Broadband, and many of you I have sat down with, and I appreciate your patience as we transition and try to do more great things for our region. My role today, I'm supposed to be your mistress of ceremonies and keep us on task and on time. So if I say you have 10 minutes, I will take away your mic if you don't listen. But on positive note, we have homemade cinnamon rolls. And so if I start offering you one, you'll know that you need to be quiet. We also have food and drink across the hall. Big thank you. Vicki Haddocks actually donated and made the cinnamon rolls. They're homemade. Sorry, as you can tell, I had one. A couple housekeeping tips. Bathrooms are out the door to your right. We will be having lunch served across the hall as well. Please help yourself. We have only one break scheduled, so get up as needed. I have a few thank yous that I'd like to make. First of all, Rick Smith, City of Cortez, for hosting this event today. Really appreciate it. Also want to thank him and Jim McLean with Montezuma County for the idea. And they really have done a lot of work trying to bring our region together around broadband in these unprecedented times. I also want to just recognize the Durango Association of Realtors actually is paying for our lunch today. So we really want to say thank you to them. And finally, last but not least, I want to recognize Emily Lashbrook and her cohort, Kat. Emily did all the details for today's event, from your name tags to the agenda, all the small details, and so really appreciate that. Emily is the new executive director for the Pagosa Springs Community Development Corporation, one of our economic development groups, and really has taken the lead. She's also taken the lead with Eric Heidel, who is working on broadband projects in Archuleta County to reconvene all of our regional broadband partners with monthly calls, and really appreciate that, and I feel like that's been such a tremendous benefit. So if I can take 1 minute and just talk about setting the stage for today. If COVID taught us nothing else, it really taught us that broadband and overall connectivity is really our missing amenity in our rural region, and that closing this gap needs to be our top priority, and that's really why we're here today. We have a region where, of course, many of our children couldn't access online education. Our communities have lacked the ability to use telehealth services, and we also don't even have the ability to work remotely in every situation and location. So again, I want to thank Rick, Jim, Eric, and Emily for reconvening those monthly broadband meetings, because as participation has grown, so has our regional collaboration, and it's really provided me, as well as everyone who's participated, an opportunity to learn what we are all working on. And in these unprecedented times, we really have the opportunity to collaborate as a region for funds to fill all of our gaps. And we know that by working together and having a regional plan, we can connect not just our last mile, but our middle mile. So again, one thing that I have to say is when we started the SCAN project in the early 2000s, we were ahead of the curve for the state. Our region has fallen behind since, and we really hope today to continue to come up with a regional vision and how we're going to move forward. So I really, again, appreciate all of you being here. Can you all hear me? I got a mic check there. I feel like I'm singing when I hold it like this, So without further ado, let me turn this over to our first speaker. Michelle Haynes is Region 10's Executive Director, and I'm proud to call her a friend as well as a peer. If you don't know Michelle, empowering communities and enriching lives of families is what inspires and feeds her. She spent her career in nonprofit management in healthcare primarily, mental health and regional services organizations. In 2013, Michelle became Region 10's Executive Director. They are leading the charge across the state with Broadband, overseeing regional projects. They work on transportation planning. They have a microloan program. They run their regional SBDC, their area agency on aging, and of course, Broadband. Her region is truly at the forefront of Broadband, and she will be sharing her lessons learned and a lot of information. So Michelle, I don't know if you want to walk around with the mic, if you want to sit on the dais, but I'm going to turn this over to you.
Good, just standing right here, be close to everybody. Thank you. I'm not very good at a mic though, so please let me know if we need to do something else. Thanks for having us here today. We are so excited. We love coming to our neighbor region here in Southwest Colorado. Love being here with Laura and all the rest of our friends here. So as Laura said, I'm Michelle. I am the Executive Director for Region 10. And and also here with us, wherever he went, is Corey Brindle, who is our Broadband Director that started with us just a few months ago. So we are very glad to be here and talk about the project that we've been working on for quite some time. So next slide. So I don't think we need to explain where we are or where we're from. This is a presentation I use pretty regularly. But we are the region just to the north of Region 9. We're very similar to your region in that we, have a lot of both resort communities and then a lot of agriculture, light manufacturing, just very similar to your region in population and geography. We serve 6 counties with about 16 communities. Region 10 serves as both the Economic Development District. We serve as the Council of Governments for our region. We also host the Area Agency on Aging, and we have a small business resource team that does our loan fund, and we also host the SBDC. So a little bit about our organization there. Our broadband project actually came out of our economic development planning. And when I became the Executive Director of Region 10, unemployment in our region was at 10%. And as Laura mentioned, I had worked in health and human services. I'm like, I don't know what to do about 10% unemployment. And so we talked to our governments, like you all, we are a government member organization. We said, hey, what do we need to do? And they said broadband. Broadband is our biggest issue. Not only can we not bring businesses in, but we are not even able to keep the businesses we have. They're leaving because we don't have broadband. And so we made that our top effort. As any of you that know me, and as you get to know me, you will know, thank you, that I am not a technical person. I literally did not understand the definition of broadband when I started, and that's not a joke. That is pretty serious. So it was a whole new thing for us. And as we talk about broadband, obviously, we all understand what the challenges are, particularly in our region. You know, we have mountains, we have canyons. You don't just go out and throw some fiber in the ground. We have a couple of our providers here that are contractors, and we work with them. We know how hard it is, you know, to get this fiber in the ground or on the poles or whatever it is. We do kind of joke about, like, I don't know, is anybody here from Eastern Colorado? Hopefully not, because they'll talk about not having broadband. I'm like, really, what's your issue? It's all flat. That should not be a hard thing. But, you know, building in our area is just really hard. And so we kind of set about to try to figure out how to make this work for us. And we were fortunate that In 2015, we actually put out an RFP, and I will be ever so grateful that we worked with Diane Cruz with NeoConnect, who actually helped us develop a plan. And much like the position that everyone is in these days, we were very clear. We don't want to study. We know we need broadband. We need a plan about how to get broadband to our community. So we worked with NeoConnect to come up with a plan to say, how can we connect our communities in a meaningful way to get broadband to each of our communities, and then work with our private providers to go from there. So we worked out with her. We spent about a year working through the plan. A lot of, as you know, a lot of issues and challenges around that. Next slide. To think about, one of the, how do you get a broadband network in your region? Do you build it? That's really expensive. Is there a way you can use existing assets, which is a lot of what Diane helped us to develop, is to identify and utilize existing assets in the region? Do you do leases? Unfortunately, there's still some places where we have to use leases. It's our least favorite, if you could go back one, sorry, our least favorite way to do it. But there are times where we have to lease fiber, and we call that kind of our 70 to 80% solution. I was sharing with the team last night, one of the things that Diane said, and I share this almost always if I'm talking about broadband, is she would say, in broadband there's this whole range, right? There's like do nothing, the 0% solution. There's the 100% solution. Could we build new fiber everywhere? That would be awesome, right? Fiber to the home, that'd be awesome. But somewhere in between do nothing and do everything, there's a do something. And we take the do something approach. We will often say when we're talking to other people and they're like, we really want to build. Well, we did too, but right now we're going to do the 70 to 80% solution, which is to utilize this existing line. And it makes it really affordable. It makes it a little bit faster, and not that we're not still working on the 100% solution. For example, our line between Montrose and Gunnison, we really need a new line there. We're working on that, but in the interim, we're using an existing asset. And then there's the consideration about who owns it. Not there yet, sorry. Who owns it? When we started working on our plan, we spent about a year planning, and they kept saying, who's going to own this? I'm like, I don't know who owns it, but not Region 10. We don't do that. We plan projects. We don't do, we don't own these projects. We plan them. But as we went through, so we looked at, is it a nonprofit? Do you work with a private ISP and allow the ISP to own it? Well, we've kind of been there, done that. So kind of wanted to look at that a little bit differently. Nothing against our ISPs. We love our ISPs. But we do really feel like that we are kind of all in on the open access model for a bit. So I'll talk about that, and Corey will talk about that a little bit later. But do we have an ISP do it? Do we have a new consortium, which is what we looked at? But during that time, while we were still considering it, some funding opportunities started becoming available. And DOLA, Ken Charles was our DOLA rep at the time. DOLA set aside $20 million of broadband funding. And everybody's like, oh, what do we do with that? Well, we had a plan. We said, we know exactly what we'll do with that. We worked with Ken to get our first DOLA grant, which was about $5.5 million, and DOLA has been a big funder of our projects. And we began to move forward on a plan to actually implement broadband connectivity with Region 10 as the key owner. And one of the reasons we did become the owner of that is because, like you all, we are already a consortium of governments, and our governments really wanted it to be truly a regional project. They didn't want it to be, they just wanted it to be regional, with regional control, not a single provider, not a single government, but really a regional look at the project. Okay, and we looked, so with this, there's a lot of different levels, as I've talked about, that you can think about when you're thinking about how to engage in broadband. We kind of started out as the resource. Maybe we thought we might be an integrator. There's the aggregation, which I think is a lot of what Southwest COG has been doing, and then there's full-on ownership. And with all of that, there's some risk and some reward. And with your increased risk, obviously, sometimes your reward increases. I'd have to say, I'd have to think about if that's actually a reward or not, but it's been a challenging project. But we've seen a lot of great benefits come out of this project. The other thing that we really worked on is leveraging partnerships to make this happen. And I still quote that I heard Laura say many years ago, that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go with partners. And I tell people, I don't really understand technology super well, but partnerships, wow. That has been one of the most amazing parts of this project. Early on, we worked with our rural electric provider, DMEA. We have 3 in our region, but Delta Montrose Electric Company had built out broadband to serve for their internal operations, right, to connect their SCADAs. And as our community was really needing broadband, we had a whole group of people, about 100 people, show up at DMEA and said, hey, we need for you to use this more than monitoring your SCADA. Can you do something else? And we worked with DMEA to develop a plan to be able to utilize some of their broadband assets for middle mile. And so they actually donated those assets to us early on in the project. It was worth about $2 to $2.5 million. We brought that in as match for our DOLA grant. In addition to our governments coming in with match, a lot of them came in. They probably have donated or contributed, I would guess, $4 to $5 million over the course of the project to the programs, different governments coming in and saying, yes, we want to participate. Yes, we want broadband in our community. We have a bit of a unique model because as we started working with our governments, you know, they'd say, what's our revenue return? Like, your revenue return is you get broadband in your community. That's your revenue return. We're going to use the rest of the revenues for operations, which is pretty much how our model works. So they contributed to the initial capital build-out, and then we took on the ownership and the operations of that network. We've worked with universities. Western was one of our early anchors, and they actually helped us develop the line or obtain the line between Montrose and Gunnison. And we're continuing to work with those more. And what we see is that as you begin partnerships, they develop new partnerships. So as we worked with Western, we got introduced to the Front Range Gigapop, which is a internet peering, sharing service. Higher education, that our universities on the Western Slope have not had access to because we've not had sufficient capacity to get to them. And so we just joined the Front Range Gigapop this year and are working to get our universities set up to have access to service at the Front Range Gigapop. And so just as we worked on those and we moved forward, we just kind of kept developing more and more partners. And I think that's been one of the really exciting parts of this. Another real key component of our plan is utilizing a carrier-neutral location. Corey's going to talk about this a little bit more in his presentation, but in his part of the presentation. But having a place where ISPs can access the service in a community. So again, this was our basic plan. How do we get to our communities? As much as possible, utilizing existing assets. We typically, if possible, take an indefeasible right of use, an IRU. I think of it as a capital lease kind of on fiber to get to our communities. And then in each of our communities, the community hosted for us a carrier-neutral location, sometimes at town hall, sometimes at a school, but typically we have built them as well. But each community has hosted a carrier-neutral location. And we would set those up to be a carrier-grade access point with everything that you need for that and rack space. And then we lease that space to our ISPs. And so really our model is we bring service to that carrier-neutral location, and then we work with private providers to take that out into the community, and they can access service there. Next slide, please. So as we've done this, then we continue to expand. So right now, this is a map of our current service area. We have about 500 to 600 miles of fiber. We have about 14 carrier-neutral locations on board right now. We're continuing to develop more. We still have some gaps, as you can see over here on the far right. Our line ends in the city of Gunnison. We're working to see how to get up to Crested Butte and Mount Crested Butte. Don't have that quite figured out yet. We were very excited last year to do a project to get to Lake City and Hinsdale, which has not had broadband for, well, not adequate broadband for a long time. And so we're excited to be able to serve them. And we continue to work to expand that network a little bit further out. This year, and Corey's going to talk about this a little bit more, we actually obtained a grant. Well, we obtained a grant a couple years ago to go from Grand Junction to Denver, working with partners and again creating more regional connections. So we were connecting our region to the region north of us, Region 11, and then we're connecting through Region 11 to Region 12 to another broadband project, Project Thor, which gets us to Denver, allows us to connect to the Front Range Gigapop, access internet service at a much lower cost. And our original plan was that would be a straight shot. Our original plan was we're going to connect Region 10 to Denver, and that was the whole plan. And as soon as those communities along the way found out that we were doing that connection, we started getting calls from the Mason County Commissioners, the Garfield County Commissioners. Diane works a lot with those, so she set up a lot of those calls. And they said, hey, can you connect us too? And Corey mentioned last night, he said, Michelle said, hey, I did not plan to connect the entire Western Slope. That was not Region 10's plan. But it is such a great project, and how do you say no to these communities that really need access to service? And so we're working to continue to connect our communities. We believe at Region 10 that we all work together on the Western Slope, right? It's for us to succeed, everyone needs to succeed. And when we talk about this from an economic development standpoint, we say people in the Front Range may not know where Montrose is. You know, they don't know where Rifle is. They may know a few places on the Western Slope. I've been in the Front Range before, and they're like, are you from Utah? Like, no, we're not from Utah, and we know where Denver is, but okay. So, you know, and I really believe the best way we can do this is if we all work together, right? The whole rising tide lifts all boats kind of concept. So we're excited to be working to continue to develop that. And in our recent grant that we got to help connect Garfield and Mesa County to our network as well, instead of passing through, we're going to set up some connections there. We also put in a connection down here to Durango and to Cortez. And so we're really excited to start really seeing our regions start to connect together. Corey's working with San Luis Valley, and he'll talk about that a little bit to move forward. But again, it just comes back to how do we leverage this middle mile? And as you all know, we started out under Senate Bill 152 in the state where, the large providers were, hey, we got this covered. We got this covered. And as communities began to opt out, it was clear that they did not feel like the providers had it covered. And one of the things we've heard is middle mile doesn't really make a difference. What you need is fiber to the home. And we do need fiber to the home. But what we have found is that we can support our ISPs by providing this middle mile fiber. So Doug's here today, and this was a quote we had used in a grant, and we've used it in a couple of presentations, but and I hope you don't mind if I share this, Doug, but he has said, I like working with your project because I know I can go to any one of your CNLs and I can connect, and I know what I'm connecting to, and it's consistent across the board. And so we feel like that's been a really key part of the success of our project. We've had providers tell us, wherever you go, let us know we're going to. And so in each community where we've been able to connect, we've been able to serve 2 to 3 providers out of that carrier-neutral location and improve last-mile service for our community as well. And so this is kind of a map of, I didn't expand it out to include this area, and it's an older map. It's about a couple of years old, but looking at gigabit services. So we are very blessed to have gigabit service in our region at this point in time. We were also blessed that we have great providers, like Deeply Digital, other providers in our region, working with Mammoth to go to Lake City. But also at this, shortly after we started our middle mile project, our electrical co-op, DMEA, decided to do a last mile project and do a fiber to the meter project as well, which has greatly improved service in our region as well. And we're working with them now on this larger connection to improve resiliency in our network and in theirs as well. I live a little bit outside of town in Montrose. I don't live right in town. I live up on the mesa, and I have gigabit service at my house for $80. So my daughter, who lives in Pueblo, she's like, seriously, Mom? We don't get that. So, you know, it's really great to see that. And one of the things that we saw during the pandemic was access for our schools. Again, our providers, Elevate, Deeply Digital, our other providers in the community worked to make sure our students were connected during the pandemic when they all had to go remote. And I don't have this slide, but there was a slide that was shared by CBO right after the pandemic about satisfaction with your remote school experience and your broadband. And our region scored very close to the Front Range region. We were actually the very next region after the Front Range region in levels of satisfaction, and we were very close to that. So we were grateful that we had started this project, you know, earlier on. If you all remember, in 2013, we started losing our coal mines. We've lost 3 of our 4 coal mines. Is that right, Katie? I'm trying to think. Katie was there. In Delta and Montrose counties. And so we were expecting our economy to plummet. We hadn't quite gotten out of the recession yet, right? As you all know, the Western Slope was a little bit behind in recovery already. And I don't think I have this slide in here, but what we saw was in Delta County, not to minimize it, it was an impact. There was a hit. But it didn't hit as badly as we thought it would hit. We obviously were doing some other things to try to offset that. And what we saw was even as our coal mine jobs declined, our median income began to increase as people could bring their work from anywhere jobs to our region, as we were able to attract new businesses, some new manufacturing businesses to our region, because now we have broadband. When we first started our first co-working space in Montrose, we had a company that would drive from Grand Junction to Montrose to upload their files because they could do it faster in Montrose, and it was worth it for their time to drive that hour to get there to do it. So having access to the service, I don't need to tell you guys this, makes a difference in your region. It certainly made a difference in ours. And so as I mentioned, we're continuing to expand this through regional partnerships. Corey, you're going to be up. We're continuing to expand this network through regional partnerships, moving on to, as we said, connecting the northwest part of the state with our partners, with new partners now, connecting to Durango and Cortez and working with partners here to see how we could leverage that better to make sure that your region can get connected to this greater network as well, continuing across the valley and hopefully building a bit more redundancy in, but that's Corey's part of the presentation, I believe. Right. Yes, you can introduce Corey. And we'll switch to the other presentation.
And then we do have some time, hopefully, for questions for both Michelle and Corey, so save them. Yes. So I have to introduce Corey Brindle as well. He's the Regional Broadband Director for Region 10, but he's also serving as a technical advisor for DOLA. And so that's where we've been really utilizing him a lot in our region, and I so appreciate it. We're actually working on 2 grants right now that are due Friday, and we're going to apparently not write them today, but tonight. And Corey comes to us from it says, this is from your bio, the West Elk Mountains, and is no stranger to our region, living both in Region 9 and Region 10. So he has been a partner in Region 9 for a long time. And he actually created the Mountain Connect Rural Broadband Development Conference that is still occurring. I'm actually attending that in May, and I know several of you are as well. He has 20 plus years of design, architecting, and implementing IP and optical service delivery networks, extensive experience, and currently Corey is focusing on completing a broadband background around Western Colorado to serve 65 plus rural and remote communities, and will be sharing the big picture with us today. Corey, you have the floor.
Wow, well, it is amazing to see so many familiar faces in this crowd. Thanks for everybody for showing up, and I hope this material is helpful to you. Is the audio working okay? Hello? There you go. All right, cool. Gosh, when we started Mountain Connect, Justin, Rick, on, so many of you guys were involved in that. And the whole concept there was to get the regions communicating. There was federal funding coming into the state, and we wanted to make sure that as those dollars were spent, that we got the most bang for the buck out of it. And we shared the lessons that were being learned in Southwest Colorado with the rest of the state and started to kind of create the communication. A couple years into that, Jeff Gavlinski took that over and has just added fuel to the fire and made that a large commercial success. So I was glad to be involved in the small part of it and as it grew. So you guys want to, can you add the slide? There you go. Okay, so a couple basic concepts I just wanted to go over. First thing, everybody deals in this split between middle mile and last mile. They're symbiotic and they connect to each other. Basically, we're looking at how to get data, high-speed transport out to the rural areas. Naturally, that infrastructure is not always there. On the last mile services, we want to go ahead and deliver that. You guys all know this. You're operating in this environment today. There's kind of 4 key areas. We used to say abundant, redundant, and affordable. Well, redundant doesn't really work because we don't want to build paths that are already there unless we can't get access to them. In most cases, we're looking for resilient services. We're looking for ways to improve service delivery. We want to have an east and west path into each community. So if one of those paths goes down, another path's available. We want to make sure we've got geographic diversity. So around the state, we've got forest fires. We've got mudslides. We've got a lot of track hose and construction projects that take down fiber around the state. So I want to make sure we reduce the single points of failure around the area. So capacity, everything we're doing right now going forward with Region 10 is 100 gig and above. So we're using the technology advances in coherent optics, in DWDM, and some of the advanced technologies to push out significantly larger capacities. As far as cost compression, right now we've got a connection in Denver that's being developed. We'll add a connection in Salt Lake City, and then we continue on down to Albuquerque and Phoenix at the end of the day. So at a logical point, all around the state, we want to be able to get traffic out to the greater internet. And the last one here that's really perhaps the more recent addition is performance. This isn't something we thought about when we started Mountain Connect and whatnot, but your applications are no longer living on your laptop. They're no longer living in the closet in the servers in the corner of the building. They're living hundreds or thousands of miles away from where you're consuming those applications. So the performance of the network between your device, laptop, phone, whatever, and where that application and that data is residing has become really critical. Good. Can you adjust the view a little bit? Slide them up there. Okay. So this kind of goes over the 5 regions that the Region 10 network is growing into. We started out working just in Region 10 in the home territory and did a lot of work on middle mile access there and partnerships like Michelle mentioned. As we started to expand up through the AGNC and the Northwest Territory, all those communities came to us. The counties came to us, the communities came to us, and they said, gosh, if you're going through here, drop off service. Work with us. Figure out how to do this. So we worked with them. We've got 14 separate communities that will have laterals and CNLs in that area. The Project Thor area is an area that Mammoth had been partnered with and helped with a lot of development throughout that set of communities. That gets us down to Denver on I-70. And then in the southwest, there's the PathNet, or now the Tri-State fiber, that comes down the power lines and comes all the way into Durango and continues on to Albuquerque. And then in the San Luis Valley, there's fiber that was developed about 10 years ago through a federal project that comes in through Walsenburg and over towards South Fork and Wolf Creek Pass. Advance. So this is a little town called Palisade, Colorado. Palisade sits just outside of Grand Junction. Palisade is about just under 3,000 people. Its median income is about half of the state's average. So there's very low likelihood that Palisade would see significant commercial investment from any of the major players. The nearest city of 50,000 people is 180 miles away, and that's Boulder, Colorado. Even though Grand Junction's sitting right there, Palisade is not seeing the commercial investment that larger cities do. So we all get our peaches from Palisade. We all see the things on the side of the truck. So we know Palisade has a need. Can you go ahead and advance? So in this slide, you see a red line coming along the highway. There's a company, a national company, that was developing a fiber line from Chicago to the West Coast. And they wanted to develop a low latency fiber line, one that would allow traders to access data in the West Coast and applications. That fiber line started in Chicago, and it continues all the way out to the West Coast. it came through Colorado. And our Department of Transportation worked with them to get right-of-way access into the highway. And as a result, we have a very fast fiber line available with many vaults along I-70. In the event that that fiber doesn't appear through an agreement or a process like that, we'll go ahead and construct it. OCPH, the Uray County Public Health Network, is a perfect example. There's not available fiber that we could get access to down into Uray, and Region 10 with their partners in Uray County and through construction firms here, they were able to build 46 miles of fiber all the way down into Uray. So if we can't buy it, which is our preference, we'll go ahead and build it. So this, graphics aren't showing up great on my side, but this shows from the highway, we need a lateral fiber down into what we call a carrier neutral location. So that's basically an umbilical cord. It's a patch cord that gets us from the highway down to the CNL where we house equipment, and that's where the middle mile fiber meets the last mile fiber. So this is an example of a community where we've got vaults along the way, fiber comes in, and at the end of the day we land in this little CNL. The CNL can be either prefab building or it can be a remodel of an existing space. Advance one. So these are a couple CNLs that we've got in place. We've got 14 of them today. There are 18 of them in various states of development today. So these little Meet Me centers are popping up all over the state, all over the 5 regions of that map, whether it's in the San Luis Valley, the Southwest here, additional ones in Region 10, up through the Northwest, and there's several that are growing in the Thor territory too. So this has a set of racks. On the left, that's Ridgeway. That'll have last mile equipment occupying what shows in this picture is the empty racks, and then middle mile equipment occupying 2 of those racks. That's a fully conditioned space. So that's a drop-in shelter, a prefab facility. It's got dual air conditioning. It's got redundant power, a gas-powered generator outside. It's got key card swipe locks. It's got an IP camera in it so that we can record and tell what's going on. If somebody drops a ladder, we want to get better at not dropping ladders. So we want to find out what events occur in that CNL and get better at operating it. On the right, that's the Telluride School District. That's the back. That's a remodel application where we took about 10 foot by 20 foot space, put racks inside that, and those 2 air conditioners there support that. The horizontal conduit in that picture, it goes out to a gas-powered generator and keeps that site up and running. On the roof there, you see a little dish, and they're able to put antennas on that roof and go ahead and feed Telluride Mountain Village and some of the surrounding homes, the private ISPs. So let you advance one. So in a carrier-neutral location, the whole point here is that this is a place where we can lower the barrier to entry for last-mile investment. We want to support the last-mile ISPs. This entire network is developed so that we can provide that backhaul, that upstream services. It's a location for them to put equipment. If you want to attract a last-mile ISP to make a fiber-to-the-home investment in your community, you want to make sure that they have someplace to house. They're not running around looking and trying to find that optimal space. You want easy access to upstream services. So in this case, Region 10 is able to provide those middle-mile services. In other cases, we'd like to have multiple middle-mile providers in there. We've got several locations where CenturyLink, Zayo, other networks exist in the CNLs. The other piece there is you don't want to be in a facility that's owned by your competitor. You want this to be truly neutral. So interconnection becomes easy, getting a space lease becomes easy, adding additional services becomes easy. You're not dealing with process and expense. You're actually removing those barriers from it. So it's ultimately a place where the middle mile networks meet the last mile networks. So let you advance one. This is an example of a CNL that's planned for Mount Crested Butte, Colorado. This is near where I live. It's a little town of about 1,200 people year-round, a little bit larger when you consider the visitation. On the left side, there's 2 middle-mile racks, and on the right side, there's the 3 last-mile racks. You've got a set of ladders and lighting above it. You've got air conditioning, dual redundant air conditioning in the back. We have access control in the door in the front. Then we have IP cameras, and that will actually use 2 parking spaces in a garage of an existing parking structure. So how you build these, where you develop them are pretty flexible. We've done them in municipal buildings. We've dropped in prefabs into different sites, and that's an example. This is actually the one that will go into Durango. This is La Plata County's CNL that is planned and soon to be funded. This one's a little bit larger community with more ISPs in the area. So this one has 8 racks in the back, dual air conditioning. We've actually, for one of our ISPs, they've asked to have dual entry into that building. So you see a point of interconnect on the upper side of the corners there. That's basically 2 conduits coming in from the outside of the building. Overhead LED lighting, and then we've got dual A and B power feeds into the equipment there. A little more capacity, and since we've got so many ISPs that could potentially occupy these racks, we did this with cabinets rather than racks. So let you advance one. What goes into a CNL, at least from Region 10's point of view? We bring an east and west fiber path. We bring some optical equipment into it. We bring some transponders, which are the things that drive light through the network, and then we put a router at the bottom. That router is the intelligent device that allows us to make an east and west selection as to where traffic will go. So if one path is withdrawn and goes away, if there's an electronic failure, if there's a fiber cut, if there's a power outage, the traffic can move in the other direction. So, advance one. So what are we trying to do? Who are we trying to attract into these CNLs? The first thing is a fiber to the home provider. We want someone who will come in and make the investment with private dollars, with public dollars, with a mix of those two, and drive fiber deeper into the community. The other piece is we want to strengthen and work with the wireless ISPs. We want to give them bigger pipes, bigger backhaul, a place to put equipment, a place to put radio launch points. And just in perfect example, when we built Packet Rail years ago, first thing we did, you're our first customer. We put dishes on top of the tri-state regen. Very similarly, we want dishes on top of these locations. In Crested Butte, we actually included a 40-foot tower next to the CNL, and immediately we were able to get ISPs to use that tower for contact space. The other one is mobile wireless. So we want to make sure the cellular guys have the possibility of using these locations. The use of cell phones, the amount of capacity that's required, the latency going to them, all those requirements have come up, and there's companies such as ComNet Wireless that repeats and extends cell service into remote areas. We want them to benefit from these CNLs as well. What you see in this picture is everything in the shaded area, everything in the gray area, that is all private companies, private infrastructure. Everything around it, and the slide isn't showing up well, I'm sorry, but everything around it is public dollars supporting private industry. At no point are we trying to compete with private industry. We've seen that tried over and over and failed. And in this case, in this model, what we want to do is give them better tools and design these services to support the ISPs and work with them. So, as far as the community anchor institutions on the right side of the slide there, we are not after the community anchor institutions. We would prefer that your local ISPs be able to service, support, and connect to those community anchors. I've seen it done where a network like this that has broad reach comes in and attempts to grab all that revenue. It doesn't work. We want the service, we want the support, we want the billing, we want all the end user services applied to those community anchors. Now, if a government customer comes to us, especially in our home territory, and says, hey, we've been working with XYZ company, it's not been working out, we'd really prefer to go to our network operator directly, we will accommodate that request. But we're not out selling and trying to compete with our ISPs. We're really trying to make it work for them. So this is kind of the three ingredients. The middle mile fiber, either finding it and buying access to it, or building it if we need. Coming up with the lateral fiber to move over the services over to the CNL, and ultimately developing and putting those CNLs that house the middle mile and the last mile equipment. So it works in Palisade. This is an example of Palisade. Fiber coming down in. We've got providers that want to provide fiber throughout, wireless towers around the site, and as that fiber is rolled out, those folks can use that to access cell sites. Cell site density is increasing with the technology advancements, so we want that fiber to be used for mobile wireless as well. Works in Pagosa Springs. Eric's here. We've been working on a CNL project there, working on getting east and west fiber in and out of Pagosa, and that's a key location as well. So that I'll talk a little bit more about Pagosa. One more. Works in Bayfield. So Bayfield applied for a CNL. That application was recently funded. So Bayfield will have a lateral fiber, and Bayfield will also have a CNL. That gives us the ability to have east and west fiber as it's developed in and out of Bayfield. We're working on those plans right now. And we could do the same thing in Ignacio, just south of there. So each of these towns could see a small meet-me facility and fiber routes east and west. One more. This is the town of Fruita. So Fruita is actively working on broadband development, both in the town of Fruita and for the periphery north of Fruita. Those are very difficult areas to serve, areas that have historically not been served. Lateral fiber right off the highway and fiber up to a CNO. Advanced one. So if I fly over Colorado at night, and I travel a good bit, I come in and out of Colorado, from my point of view, the first thing I see is 4 fiber routes and the town of Silverton. So the town of Silverton has its lights on. You cannot fly over the state without finding Silverton from an airplane. I see fiber across I-70. I see the PathNet tri-state route down through to Durango. I see a route between Durango and Walsenburg that has portions of it, and I see a complete route from Denver to Walsenburg that's actually being completed all the way down to the state border into Mexico. Advance one. So first thing we've got to do is get access to that fiber and increase the capacity. And in order to increase the capacity, that means we need to put more wavelengths of light onto those strands of fiber. And what Region 10 was able to do was acquire a grant from this Department of Local Affairs that allowed us to purchase the equipment for Denver to Grand Junction and Grand Junction down into Cortez and Durango to increase the capacities along those routes significantly. That's where we move up to 42 channels of wavelengths on the single pair of fiber. That's where we increase the capacities from what has typically been 10 gig to 100 and 400 gig services along those paths. In our second phase, we'll increase the capacities and buy access to the fiber from Denver to Walsenburg, and we'll continue from Walsenburg across to Durango. So increase one. So all that capacity, that ability to move data across the network, we need to get it somewhere. We need to get it somewhere useful. And our ISPs either want to get to a connection in a metro area where the cost to acquire that bandwidth is less, where the content providers have their edge nodes or their equipment. And right now what we're working on is getting into Denver, into Salt Lake City. So a 100 gig circuit will come out to Salt Lake City, and then through to Albuquerque and ultimately into Phoenix, Arizona. So those 3 drains, and in the future we'll hopefully be able to develop a connection into Dallas as well. That means that if there's a failure in equipment, if there's a cable cut, all the acts of God, the mudslide and the fire and the excavator, if any of those failures occur around the ring, the traffic can still move out of the state to the content locations. I thought I'd share this one with you too. This is a little bit of an update as to what has changed in internet traffic over the last 24 months. As we went into the pandemic and came out of it, we saw about a 10% increase in traffic going to 6 separate sources. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft. These are where the cloud is. These are where the big banks of servers, the applications, the data that sits on your phone isn't actually on your phone. It's sitting out in data centers where these companies reside. 60% of our traffic, when we buy an upstream circuit from a large provider, gets peered off or directly dropped into the infrastructure that these companies own. So we're buying transit or buying upstream services in these cities, but we're also developing direct connections to these 6 companies. Some of the ISPs have done this partially. We're trying to do this with at least this 6. In addition, you'll hear a little bit in the next presentation about internet exchanges, and that's a good way to kind of to get a fast path to accessing these 6 guys. But in Region 10's case, we're developing direct peering with each of these folks. Advance. So we know in southern Colorado, construction is required. All the cabling is not there, so we can't put the someone's home. We can't put all the optical equipment, the routing equipment on cabling that doesn't exist. So there's existing fiber that was built about 10 years ago through a federal project that came from Walsenburg over to South Fork. And CDOT has actually continued that construction almost to the summit of Wolf Creek Pass, and they'll continue over the next 2 summers to come down to the corner of 84 and 160 in Pagosa Springs. As that fiber becomes available and comes down the pass, we're working on a solution now with 4 separate partners to sew up the section between Pagosa and Durango that's not currently funded by the CDOT project. Perhaps they get the funding. Ideally they do. If not, we'll have a second path that will go south of that area and come right back to Durango. It'll pick up about 5 additional communities as well. Out here in Cortez, back one. Sorry. Out here in Cortez, we've got the Mancos and Cortez would benefit if we took 19 miles, and there's a rec path that's going in, and we'd like to take that 19 miles and build fiber to connect Cortez to Mancos. What that does is that gets us back up into the ring on an northbound path and on an eastbound path. That means that Cortez can now endure a failure. Additional capacity comes to Cortez. There's a splice point, an interconnection point into the tri-state ring in Mancos that could be used. That means that we don't have to build the additional 40 miles of fiber from Mancos back to Durango today. We can do that in the future, but we can at least get the benefits to the CNLs in those two communities. In the future, as this additional funding comes into the state, the additional 40 miles could be appended to a last mile project. But just to get the initial benefits, we wanted to do the things we could access and fund within the state, and hopefully that we can develop that into a good project and connect the two communities. So next one. Where are we going? We want to bisect the state and bring up the interior. So there's some fiber that goes from South Fork del Norte north into Saguache. We want to do a construction effort to get over Poncha Pass. There's Western Area Power Administration, WAPA fiber, that goes from Montrose through Gunnison, through Poncha Springs and Salida, and heads on over towards Colorado Springs. We're negotiating with WAPA to try to do the right things and get access to that fiber. If we can get on even a pair of that fiber, there's only 24 strands in that cable, but even if we can get on 2, we'll be able to bisect the state. And then the section from Salida up through to Copper Mountain, that's a future construction build and would likely have to be added to some last mile projects. So at the end, what does that do? That gives us additional regional redundancy. That means that we can now endure not just one failure around the ring, but we can endure multiple failures. We could have an equipment outage in one place, a mudslide that we know is coming in another place, and perhaps a forest fire in a third place. And traffic will still move from our communities out to Salt Lake City, over to Denver, down to Albuquerque, and potentially out to Texas. So, name, address, feel free to ask questions, and thanks for your attention. So, hope it's helpful.
We do have a few minutes for questions if anybody has something they don't want to hold. Yes.
When you put a CNL in, what's the typical, you talked about depth into the communities from there. How far are you seeing that typically reaching? How far is last mile extending from these CNLs?
It's kind of a mix. So in Montrose and Delta, in Montrose and Delta, for example, we see the CNL have a last mile provider that expresses 20, 30, 40 miles, all the way up into McClure Pass in that direction. When Michelle had mentioned the fiber, how far Elevate had gotten in some of the areas, Crawford is a little town just north of the Blue Mesa, way out in the middle of nowhere. A couple ranches, gas station, a restaurant, very small community, very far away. There's fiber on the poles all the way out, serving the ranches and ultimately some wireless towers in Crawford. So the reach of it is really a function of how far the last mile ISPs are able and willing to invest. We don't want to overpopulate the CNLs. We want to put them strategically in places that make sense, places where the ISPs can make the case for private and public funding. In other locations, we've seen very tight reach. If you look at Ouray, Ouray is an example where steep mountain valleys, Deeply Digital, Clear Networks has gone through, and Forethought has gone through Ouray and just saturated the area with fiber. And there's more to do on the outlying areas. But they're constrained just by the topology, where they can't get a lot of mileage, but they can certainly sew up an area that hasn't necessarily seen the investment. So. That's what I was thinking of, is if you look at the topology I put up there, there's a mix of fiber types. There's aerial fiber, there's underground fiber, we've got the premium route around on I-70, we've got a 25-year route on Tri-State, and we've got new construction that'll occur in the south side of the state. So we're really shooting to make the things work and not waiting for the 100% solution, the gold-plated best case. We're trying to get results now. So, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Doug. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. In Telluride, we didn't want to build until that place. It didn't even need to be built yet, the CNL, but we needed to, as a community, decide where the CNL should be built. In Delta, we're building out the entire town of Delta. Basically, we're going to see how much of that north region take coming into the town of Delta. But there's synchronous CNL, so really that was until Region 10 decided to put a CNL around it. So really, the next day we start building and doing our plan. So I think just identifying what the CNLs are.
Yeah, and each of the CNLs, we've got multiple providers in them. We've got these guys covering different patches. They're ardent competitors. They all want the same subscriber dollar, but at the same time, they've got different projects throughout the communities in different topologies and different areas, and it's just been amazing to see the work that these guys have done. So it wouldn't get there otherwise. You know, the large cable co, the large telco are not making these investments. They're being done by the more nimble companies.
So, what sort of obstacles do the ISPs incur trying to get the last mile connected to residents and commercial?
I'd say the biggest one is funding, and that dam is starting to break. There are opportunities for funding. The cost to build towers, the cost to build cabling in these remote areas with low density is significant. We've got hard pan floors where it makes trenching difficult. We've got places where there's regulatory hurdles to towers and placing cable. We've got low density of subscribers. So I'd say the financing piece, and then the other piece is the calendar. Is availability of materials and construction has more recently become a real factor. I talked to a vendor on the way here who said, hey, I've got a yard full of fiber cabling. I'd love to be able to make this available to you. I said, that's great, but do you have fiber cement vaults? Fiber cement vaults are more in demand right now than even cabling, and cabling is on a 1-year cycle at minimum to get cabling shipped. So they've got a number of hurdles, but these guys are far more innovative than I am. They're far more determined. They're touching the customers. The stuff we're doing is on the aggregation side, on the long haul side. It occupies a little bit different lane, but I definitely encourage you. There's probably 7, 8 different last mile ISPs here, and they can share some of those challenges directly too.
What about wireless? Is technology improving where they can use the CNLs? And you mentioned some examples of that. It's still provide the community with great service.
Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed at the evolution of what wireless has done. It's been able to get service to places that would have no service or very impaired service otherwise. The speeds have come up, the architectures to make it resilient has increased, the management tools available to the wireless networks have improved. At the end of the day, can we get a fiber cable to there? That would be ideal, but there's limitations to what we can do. We can get a lot of places if the financing is in place, but if the funding isn't there, we look for other alternatives. What we're really trying to do is get people off of just cell phones and actually using services, whether it's wireline or wireless, that have the performance, that have the resiliency, that are able to function. You can't work a full day on your cell phone. You come pretty close, but it doesn't quite work the same as having a directly connected service.
One more follow-up question on those hurdles there is that today we see slack loops of fiber in front of communities that are sitting there and been sitting there for years, but still no, what's that hurdle that the ISP isn't bringing it into the community? How does a CNL help, how would it help break down that hurdle that would enable that expansion, whereas what's sitting there right now isn't doing it today?
There's nothing more frustrating than watching a cable be built past your house, and you can't touch it, right? And you can't get the services, and you know it's literally in the right of way on the front of your property. Okay, I've got that situation at home. There's infrastructure right through, and the provider's not able to do it. Some of it's regulatory, some of it's funding, some of it's restrictions on right of way. A lot of it is having a willing partner. You know, if you've got a willing partner that's able to make those connections and use that asset, what you find is some of the older cable is lower strand count cable, and to take a part of a long cable and peel it off and go to one individual home, it's really difficult for the providers to make that decision. So on the go-forward side of it, what we've been working on is a fiber cable utilization plan. So 60% of that cable on a long-haul or middle-mile cable would be reserved exclusively for long-haul use. And then 40% of that cable would be eligible or available for distribution along the route. So we're trying to do this better. DOLA and the projects that I am involved in fund middle-mile fiber. We don't fund last mile. But if we buy an IRU from someone who's building a cable, then that provider that's going to provide us the IRU, the capital lease on that cable, can overspec that cable, increase the strands, and allow that to be used for access and distribution as well. And we've got many places where that's occurring. Doug, sorry.
I just thought I'd add to this too. I think having my region here where it's one entity to call. At first, when we had to call it Delta or Erie County or city, something like that, it's very difficult. The default is region standard pricing is similar. They know what plan is available.
Yeah, we're trying to be consistent and certainly improve those services. Cool. Thanks, guys.
warning. We'll be reconvening in 2 minutes, everyone. 2 minutes. We have our speaker watching us. Everyone, we're going to get started. Please take your seats.
You got like a... Okay, let's get started. I'd like to introduce the next speaker, one that I'm very interested in learning a little bit more about. The next is on Internet Exchange, Chris Grundeman, and he has partnered with 2210 Cortez, our data center. And if you want to talk to somebody from the data center, Christine and Nancy are here. You can catch them during the break. But with that, we'll get started with Chris and the Internet Exchange. Thank you. Chris, unmute your mic. Go ahead, Chris. Just give me a thumbs up and go. Huh?
Okay, now how do I get it off of this? Okay, hang on. Tell them to hang on 1 second.
Working on getting the audio part going.
Should be working. Yeah, but not through that.
We can hear you on the laptop, but not on the...
Yeah, but it's set to, it's already set to go there.
Text him. I got him on the text him. I told him to unmute. What else you want to do?
Nothing, I need to get it off of this, but it's, dude, it's set. I can't change it. Just put that mic right by this. Can you hear me now coming through in there? Try it again.
Hello?
I don't know why we're not hearing him, dude. It's set to go to those speakers. Unless your speakers aren't set that way. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just talking for testing here.
I don't know this system. It's not mine. I bet we have to plug in a sound or something.
I'll just keep talking in case something's not working.
I don't know how to get audio up to this. I don't have, it's not my system. And I don't see any audio cables. It's already set to go to the display. Yeah, that's not the problem.
Sound working just on the laptop there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have an audio cable, so how do I get it? Because right now it's set to go through the display audio, but it's not coming out anything.
Yeah, and it would be going to an EGP site hooked up to it. But,
Is it as simple as the volume on the display being turned down? The bigger the other display?
oh yeah, you switch it over to the. You want to talk?
Yeah, I am talking for testing. This works here. And I'll just. Shall I keep talking?
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, we're all set now?
Yep.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for having me here, and I appreciate doing some technical gymnastics to get me down there when I couldn't quite make the drive. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about internet exchange points, what they are, why you should care. I'm sure there are some folks in the room who this will all be old hat and very well-known information, but hopefully there's also quite a few folks there who will learn something from this presentation. So hopefully this is helpful. Just to kind of give you a rundown of what I plan on going through over the next 20 minutes or so. First, just a quick introduction, and then kind of zooming out to look at the internet itself and how the internet works. Because a lot of people, I think, just treat it like electricity. They turn the light on and it works. But digging behind the walls is kind of interesting sometimes. And then that will also shine a light on what an internet exchange point is and why internet exchanges are important. And then finally, a note about bringing an internet exchange down there to Southwest Colorado. So first, I'm going to start with the kind of who am I, which otherwise known as the who let this guy in question. And so, I won't drone on too much here. I have been doing this for quite a while, about 20 years in networking. I currently work on a few different projects, including IX Denver, which is a nonprofit internet exchange in the Denver metro area, and expanding throughout Denver. And I've done a few other things along the last couple of decades of working in network engineering. So jumping into the important stuff here, the first thing I want to talk about is what is the internet really? And so one very technical answer is that it's a protocol suite of TCP and IP. I think a more accurate answer is it's a network of networks. And then, of course, for most of us, day to day, it's how we communicate, how we learn, how we heal, how we do business. It's how we access critical services in our communities and abroad. And it's also how we build the future. So, digging into the first couple bits to kind of get a better understanding of how the internet works versus just what it does for us in our lives. TCP/IP, this is the slide I'm not actually going to go into. So hopefully there's some sighs of relief from some folks. But there is kind of this protocol stack behind the internet, which is how it works. But really what I want to talk about is some other more common misnomers. So one thing is the web is different than the internet. So the web is the web, so to speak, of websites that exist on top of the internet. So it's a different set of protocols. This is one map of the web. And if we zoom in here, we can see that some of the big dots are some of the big websites, content properties out there on the internet. So the difference here is that the web kind of lives on top of the internet. And one of the best things about the internet is that it can support many different protocols and different kinds of applications and content on top of it. So while we used to do just websites, there's now streaming data, Internet of Things. There's a lot of other types of data and content that goes across the internet other than just the web. This slide's also from 2010. So some of the sizes of the websites on here would have changed by now. So if the internet is not the web, then what is the internet? One way to think about this is the physical connectivity. And on the largest scale, that's between continents, right? So this is a current look at undersea cables that connect the world together, or at least connect the continents together. So this is starting to get closer to a view, I think, that's useful of what the internet really is. This is a physical layer that kind of underpins the internet itself. If we zoom in a little bit on this into the United States, some folks did a research study of long-haul fiber in the United States back in 2015, and this is the map they came up with. You can see that although this map isn't laid over a map of the United States, you can tell that the fiber pretty much runs throughout the entire United States. I will point out one thing. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but towards the middle there, you can kind of see a string of red dots that is, up I-25 through Denver. And then to the left and down a little bit, you'll see one of the biggest open areas in that long haul fiber map. And that's exactly where the Four Corners area is. So, definitely some work to be done there. And I'm glad that I can be part of this meeting where you all are talking about that. So this is a map of fiber. And again, if we're trying to understand what the internet is, I think fiber is a part of it. But again, just like the web may be too high up the stack, the fiber may be a little bit too low down the stack. When we talk about the internet, I think what we're really talking about, again, is kind of back to that TCP/IP protocol suite. It's the network of networks that are transmitting data around the world. So this is a map from 2003 that shows those connections between these networks. And it's also better seen, I think, through this video, which we won't watch the whole thing, but this shows the evolution of the internet from 1997 through to 2021. And what you can see here is each of these lines represents a network. The blue ones are the United States, the green is Europe, the red is Asia, I think the yellow is Africa, and I think there's a pink or purple that's Latin America. And you'll see as the internet grows and the years kind of roll on here, this white part in the middle starts to form up as well. And that's what folks call the internet backbone. And what defines the backbone is simply how well connected it is. So the networks that are connected to the most other networks kind of gravitate to the center of this map as things move on. And you can kind of see here down at the bottom, the biggest networks at the time, the most interconnected networks at the time are listed and kind of scroll over in that lower left-hand corner. And you can also see where they're at on the right-hand bottom corner. Obviously North America and Sprint dominated through the early 2000s. And then that'll change if we watch this whole video through. But the most important thing, I think, is really the idea that the internet is this series of networks that are connected together. And what, the internet really is internetworking, right? It's the idea of this network of networks, and that the way that a person who maybe lives over here, let's say maybe this is South Korea, can talk to, a person who maybe is over here in South Dakota, is by connecting these networks together. So you connect to your local network, that passes it off to maybe a local or regional network, that passes it off to maybe a national network, which then goes under one of those undersea cables through a provider like that, and on through this series of networks. The routing protocol of the internet actually works exactly like that. There is a autonomous system number assigned to every network, and the path is just a list of those numbers. So it's just a list of networks that information must traverse to get from wherever it's coming from to wherever it's going. So that's kind of the internet. And then when we understand that, we can start to talk a little bit more about internet exchange points. At the base level, an internet exchange point is a switch. Typically, there's an organization that operates that switch. But most importantly, it's a physical point of interconnection. So as you saw on that map, how things were moving around and those networks were kind of connecting to each other and disconnecting from each other, and some were becoming more and more connected and some maybe less connected. Where that's happening in large part, especially today, is at internet exchange points. I kind of think of them as the knots that are tying these networks together into the internet. They're what actually create the internet by allowing these networks to connect and create a overall network of networks. There's some logos on here of some of the bigger and more prominent internet exchanges around the world and in the United States. AM6 is in the Netherlands, DKIX is in Germany, Lynx is in London, and then in the US, because we're quite a bit bigger geographically and population-wise, we've got one in San Francisco, one in Seattle. Obviously, I'm here today from IX Denver. And again, all of these are all of these things, right? They're a switching fabric where networks can actually physically connect to each other and then logically peer their routes over. And then there's obviously an organization behind these that operate them. Another way to look at this is from someone other than myself. So I'll just read these quotes here, starting with the bottom one. An IX is the physical connection and infrastructure where networks exchange internet traffic. So hopefully after kind of seeing how the internet's built and talking a little bit about this, that makes somewhat sense. Another way to look at this is while the network providers may be the foundation of the internet, internet exchange points can be considered the glue that holds the internet together. So another analogy, like I said, I like knot. This person looks at glue that ties everything together. It might be helpful to look at this kind of a physical diagram of what actually happens here. And again, at the simplest level, the internet exchange point really is just a switch. And so you've got ISP A on the upper left there, ISP B, content provider B, content provider A, and they're all connected to this switch. And so the content from content provider B can now be consumed by the customers. A lot of times in the industry, they're called eyeballs because they're looking at content from ISP A or ISP B. And what's nice here is that there's this kind of direct path between the content and the users. And so a lot of things happen there, which is, local traffic stays local, which minimizes latency, jitter, and packet loss. So it makes the quality of the experience better. Also, because you're connecting locally, there's less of those transport hops, less routers, less networks you have to go through, which makes the whole thing more reliable. It also maximizes bandwidth because internet exchange points operate at LAN connectivity. It's not like an old T1 or DSL or anything you might be using to kind of connect from far away. When you're connected to an internet exchange point, you're connected right at a port speed of 1 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig, and in the future beyond. Also, one of the things this model does is to reduce costs for members because you don't have to pay transit for traffic to go between member networks, right? And so, ISP A and ISP B, they may, and without that exchange there, they may have to pay someone to get their traffic to or from the content provider. And when they're connected to the internet exchange, they do pay a membership fee to be a part of the exchange, but they don't have to pay per bit or per mile or any of the charges that happen when you're doing long haul transport or internet service on the transit side. Again, another thing this does is adds regional fault tolerance. When you add these exchanges, the more points of connectivity there are between networks, the more interconnected these networks are, the more failures can happen without actually breaking anything. And so even when specific links may be degraded or even down or cut, there's a lot of those fiber-seeking backhauls out there. Traffic can still flow locally without any interruption if everyone is connected to the local exchange. Another advantage of internet exchange points is they often bring major content sources directly to the exchange. So folks like Google, Cloudflare, Facebook or Meta or whatever you want to call them, Cloudflare is a content provider that serves a lot of the content you normally look at. Obviously, we know Google is, Netflix. There's a lot of other folks out there that have all these content sources, and they connect directly to these exchanges, bringing that content closer with all these other benefits, right? So lower latency, lower jitter, lower packet loss, greater reliability, greater fault tolerance, less cost, all those things. And then, internet exchanges are not really competitive to each other. They provide additional traffic interconnect locations for additional redundancy against other peering fabrics. So exchange points kind of support each other just as much as they support other ISPs or the content providers themselves. So I want to bring this into kind of, more of, again, an illustrative example here of how the internet works and then how an internet exchange point can affect that, right? So this is a really simple example. You can see I've kind of got a yellow user, a purple user, and a red user down across the bottom. They each have their own local ISP. On the right-hand side, there's a regional network service provider, and then you've got these national ISPs kind of up at the top there. And in this example, if the purple guy wants to talk to the red guy, maybe the red person has a server with some information on it that the purple person is doing some research and needs to understand, or maybe they're playing a video game together, for whatever reason they're connecting. They're going to pass their traffic off to their local ISP, who's going to then forward it through the regional network service provider to the other local ISP, and this goes kind of both ways. And so while purple guy here only has a commercial relationship with his local ISP B, and the red person over here only has a commercial relationship with the ISP C, their traffic's actually being passed by another company altogether. One that probably both these local ISPs are paying for transit services or transport services. And then if we look at this, from the other side, it's way worse for the yellow guy here if he wants to communicate with the purple gal. And that needs to go through this national ISP, another national ISP, down to the regional ISP, and through the local ISP. So, potentially there's actually 5 different networks that need to pass this traffic in order to get from one to the other, which definitely can add some latency. These two folks may be on the same block, or at least in the same town. And because they chose different ISPs that just have this type of connectivity, that traffic has to round about through who knows where, probably Denver, maybe even further away. And then, worse than just the latency, you can have these failures that happen upstream with or between ISPs that you don't even know about that can cause a failure of your connection. So you become reliant on these third parties. And this is just a normal way the internet works. It's all best effort traffic. But of course, because you can't see where these connections are and you don't even know about them, and you're not even paying or have any kind of contract or relationship with, this national ISP Y up here, this could happen anywhere. There's multiple unknown failure conditions, and it doesn't have to be a complete failure either. This could just be a congested port, right? Or a router that's running really hot and has limited memory. And so packets might be being discarded at that level. And that affects your local experience because you're reliant on these, faraway third parties. Now, what happens if we add a local internet exchange? Let's say that all 3 of these local ISPs are great internet citizens, and they sign up and become members of the local internet exchange. And so they're all connected to, we're calling it Southwest Colorado Internet Exchange here. And they all connect here. And now I think you can probably imagine exactly what's going to happen. That local traffic stays local. So now, instead of having to rely on this regional network service provider or any of these national ISPs, the local ISPs are exchanging traffic directly between them. And so, the scenario now, instead of like the worst case that we saw before of 5 different networks having to pass this traffic, it's only ever 2, no matter who needs to talk to who, whether it's, red to yellow, yellow to purple, whoever is, consuming content and providing content, it's just 2 hops. It's just through your local network, across the exchange, and then through the local network of the local ISP for the other user. So you can see, right, this is going to eliminate a lot of those unknown failures upstream. It's going to increase the resiliency of the whole network because, of course, if the internet exchange were to fail, you can still go the old path. That normal path is still there. You have higher capacity and a lot of other benefits of just having traffic stay local. Another thing that happens is if this exchange is, well known and well run, they're going to bring all of these big content folks to connect as well, right? So Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Cloudflare, the list kind of can go on and on. Microsoft, other folks, and these big guys, essentially become locals that are connected to this same local internet exchange, and they're only a hop away now from any of the users of these local ISPs. And so you kind of really brought connectivity that normally only happens in big cities out to wherever you may live, assuming your ISP is connected to a local internet exchange. And then finally, this also works for local services, right? So, I know I took a look at the city of Cortez's website as an example, since we're having this meeting in Cortez, and there's definitely some things there. You may want to look things up or pay taxes or services you have available to you on the kind of local government website. If the local government also connects to the internet exchange, then all of this traffic that may come from the local citizens can go directly to that portal without having to be transported across a regional or national ISP. It can save the city money and can increase reliability for those services across the serviced region. Finally, I just want to leave you with a note. Now, this quote is from 2000, but I think it's still very relevant. The ITU is the International Telecommunications Union. They're a part of the UN, and no matter how you feel about them, they have funded quite a bit of research into this space, and they advise a lot of national governments around the world on policy issues. And according to ITU surveys, interconnection-related issues are ranked by many countries as the single most important problem in the development of a competitive marketplace for telecommunication services. There's a link on this slide as well, which we can distribute later, that kind of goes into more detail of that report. But I think you can see how interconnection and internet exchange points that facilitate interconnection are vital to the conversation about increasing broadband penetration and the user experience of the internet in all parts of the world. So finally, closing out, I just wanted to mention that IX Denver is, so IX West is the nonprofit organization that owns IX Denver. IX Denver is the local interconnection fabric for our area. Our mission is to provide open, neutral, community-oriented, and membership-based interconnection exchange points. We are a co-op, so our members only pay as much as it costs us to keep the thing running. And our vision here is to constantly improve interconnectivity across the internet community. And you can see there's a traffic graph here for those of you who read these kind of things. We're peaking at decently above 100 gig every day now. We've got about 68 members. Most of the big companies I named, I think actually all the big companies I named in this presentation are already members. And we have already been in talks with the folks at 2210 Cortez to bring IX Denver's interconnection fabric down to that area. And so, we encourage everyone to eat local, drink local, shop local, but also peer local. Let's connect all of our local networks together and exchange traffic as locally as possible to save everyone money and increase reliability for the internet in our area. I know I went through that fairly quickly. I'd be happy to take a question or two if we have time. And I know that Nancy's there in the room from 2210 Cortez and can answer some other questions or give out my email address if folks want to get in touch with me directly.
Have any questions? Can you put your email or send that to Rick to distribute to our list? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am, I can do that.
Hi, I have a question on security as well. Do local IX infrastructure help to support security through the networks? Like security of data, so we're not like passing data through all these different networks?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing. I know the question was about security, but it's a little muffled for me.
I just have a question about like these local IX networks. Does that help to support like security for our networks locally as well? Not passing all our data through these regional and national type.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for repeating that. So definitely, there's a lot of cases where you may not want to send traffic from your business over the open internet. Obviously, if you work with cloud services, AWS does this thing called Direct Connect, which is kind of like a paid peering model. But you can also do that over a local exchange without having to pay anyone. If there's two businesses who both connect to the same exchange, you can pass your traffic across the exchange instead of sending it out over the open internet. So I always encourage everyone to encrypt any traffic that's sensitive anyway. But yes, you can improve security by having kind of direct connections over a peering fabric for sure.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mark? Sorry.
Thanks, Laura. Question, how do the Ncls work with an internet exchange, please?
You say NCL?
Yes.
Like a network connection location, or I guess I want to make sure I know what you're talking about.
A neutral carrier location.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways they can work together. So in some cases, it may make sense for the exchange itself to be present at one of these neutral connection locations. If there's going to be an exchange of local traffic, that often makes sense. If not, the location can provide connectivity back to a regional exchange fabric. So it can vary depending on what's going on. Basically, from iExtender's perspective, we always want to make sure that we have interconnectivity options kind of wherever there's a center of gravity of traffic that could be exchanged. And that can be in a city or just where there's a bunch of networks connected.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't think so. Thank you so much, Chris, for your presentation. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Appreciate the time.
I learned a lot on that one. I don't know. Hopefully you all did as well. I'd like to have us move on to our next speaker who drove a very long way to be with us today, Brandy Ryder. And she's the Executive Director of the Colorado Broadband Office, recently joined the office, and is responsible for providing oversight and management of the programs and statewide strategy for broadband deployment. Her work includes educating community and industry leaders like us, supporting regional collaborations, thank you, and fostering relationships with partners, mobilizing resources, and improving access and high affordability of internet services. A big part of her job is also policy and legislative development, and as you know, we're in session at the state, so we really, really appreciate you being here during that busy time. Brandy has 15 years in local government management in cities and towns across Colorado, and has also had to leverage resources to deploy broadband in her communities. Her local government experience includes managing towns in Weld, Chaffee, Saguache, and Eagle counties. She's also served in roles in public utilities, economic development, and government operations in the city of Longmont and city and county of Denver. She has a master's in public administration, and in 2020, she won the City Manager of the Year Award by the Colorado City County Managers Association. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Brandy.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So I just want to say it's a pleasure to be here. The drive was beautiful, so it didn't feel that long. I took away that I haven't gone before, so there's always a place in Colorado you haven't been until you've been there, until you go there and you're like, this is amazing. So big fan of Lizard Head Pass. It's really great. So yeah, I'm Brandy Ryder. I am the Executive Director of the Colorado Broadband Office. I took this role in February of this year, so I'm pretty new to it, but I'm having a good time, and yes, it is session and everything, and I'm kind of looking at my work in a different lens at the state versus working in local government and the communities. So it's pretty exciting. It's a great time to be in broadband, as you all are aware. I'm really excited that, we have funding to do broadband. I think that's one of the biggest barriers, if not the barrier, to deploy broadband. So the Colorado Broadband Office, the money is coming to our office to help distribute across Colorado, and I'll go over some of those funding buckets in a second. But yeah, it's great to be here and meet you all. And this won't be my last time here, so if I've missed talking to some of you, my goal is to touch base with communities across Colorado in between my work, for the Colorado Broadband Office. And I'm not in Denver, I work from Eagle, so if any of you guys are ever driving by I-70, certainly let me know. I'm available, and I can set up meetings with you guys as you guys travel around the state. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my work. I was just sitting here thinking this morning when I learned about broadband, and I went back to my town management experience in Buena Vista, where I had recently hired this new IT guy, first time we've ever hired an IT guy. It's a really big deal for a town. He was drawing those bubbles on my whiteboard. And and you know what, I'm a visual person. I got it. It made sense, and it was off to the races, if you will. After that, I was really excited, and so for me, you know, I was in Buena Vista. I participated in and launched several different broadband plans and strategies for my rural communities, and have implemented some of those. Implementation's hard. It depends on who's in your area, your partners, and your industry. And so I've always been a huge fan of public-private partnerships. I think those get the deals done. Consortiums are great. And there is a role for government to play. And I think it's, in my opinion, it's to help offset some of the big capital expenses like backhaul, middle mile. It can be pretty cost prohibitive for smaller ISPs. And so if you can remove some of those barriers, I think it's a win-win for both industry and the government. So I do have conversations in the field about the role of government, especially with industry, and I think we're all in this together, right? And so anything that we can do to support your work and help build that last mile component, at least to our rural communities, is a big deal. So most recently, the thing I'm really proud about is when I was the manager in the town of Eagle, I set up a municipal broadband utility, and I raised $10.7 million in financing for bonds. That's the other thing that's really hard, is financing of broadband. I know banks don't like to, you know, lend money to assets that are kind of nebulous, and you know they're new, and you haven't proven a formula or not a pro forma. So you know that was a really challenging situation, but we got through it, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what industry needs, what government should probably do, which most of the time is get out of the way. So, and as a city manager, I'm a huge fan of getting out of the way. I think our best work happens when we don't overthink things. So I'm hopeful I can bring that to the state of Colorado, and then also bring the perspective of folks in communities. And I think that's starting to happen. So we talked a little bit about legislation. Most recently, we passed, you know, Senate Bill 1306, and I know some of you might be familiar with the Broadband Deployment Board. We redlined the heck out of that piece of legislation and turned it into like a 2-pager, 3-pager to really move the process along. So that's just one example. So that's been my experience with broadband. I participated in Project Thor. I've done the Muni broadband. I've tagged along on different projects with ISPs partnered. So my partnerships they're varied. So and I always say one size doesn't fit all. What you guys are doing in the southwest part of the state is very different than what other areas in the state are doing. So I always say pick your broadband adventure, and hopefully we can provide funding to fund it. So that's a little introduction on me. I'm originally from Colorado, so I've been in Colorado my whole life, and most of my work is in rural communities, so I understand that perspective. So I want to talk about a few things today, and I'm going to leave some room for questions. I think we're running a little early, right? Good, so I can talk a lot. That's great. So I want to go over the governor's executive order, and I want to talk about the capital projects fund. That's the most immediate bucket of funding that we're working on right now, and we have some not immediate deadlines, but we have some deadlines this year, and I want to make you guys aware of those and kind of the planning around that. And then just some expectations, and I want to talk about a little bit about funding programs and then open it up. Part of this presentation includes going over maps and figuring out, you know, areas of critical need, but obviously it's a big group, and I think you guys kind of know what you're working with in the field in terms of speeds and critical areas of critical need. So I won't do that, but yeah. So in this year, it was in February of 2022, Governor Polis issued our executive order for broadband. And this was really helpful because, you know, you have to have a goal to work towards, and some parameters, and what are the boxes we're coloring in from the state's perspective. And of course, he starts out with 99% coverage of high-speed broadband by 2027. So that's a pretty ambitious goal. I like goals that, you know, you have to get there. I mean, this is a great goal to have. Whether we get there or not will be dependent on partnerships and how we allocate funds. So that was one of the things that he talked about. And high-speed internet, the definition for his executive order was 100 down and 20 up. And that aligns, that aligns well with all the funding, the federal funding programs, so we can achieve that through the federal funds. And then so the other thing that it also directed the Colorado Broadband Office to do was to initiate a Colorado strategic plan. So this is a statewide strategic plan, and I know some of you guys are familiar because you have done planning at the local level. And so, you know, we think that, you know, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If you have a really good plan, we're not going to come in and say, hey, your plan is, this is the plan, right? So this, we want to incorporate all the great work that the communities and industry have done over the years and incorporate those plans in our strategy. And this will really be the roadmap for the next several years on what the state prioritizes for funding. And so we're looking forward to being out in the field and doing that work with you guys. We'll solicit feedback from stakeholders, industry, community on our federal programs. We'll do a road show, so that's why I said we'll be back. We're supposed to do this by June of 2022, which is like, you know, 2 months away, but, you know, you gotta have goals, right? So we're probably gonna extend that deadline. I'll ask for it. But, so we're gonna do that, and the plan is an 18-month strategy. I know in government we like to spend a lot of time on plans. It's just, we have to do it. So, but I'll try to make it as quick as possible, but I don't want to skirt any public comment and feedback. I think the process is sometimes even more important than the outcome. But it also calls out for interagency collaboration, this EO, the governor, especially where CDOT's concerned. I know a lot of you guys have had maybe some experience with CDOT, so I'm going to, there's a lot of smiles in the audience, that's great. I love CDOT, they're great, but I'm gonna try to be an advocate for, you know, streamlining some things, and I know it's kind of a big deal. Having worked on Thor, CDOT was probably, it was a really complex deal to get done. So we finally got it done. It took only like 6 years, but hopefully we can cut that down for you guys in the field. So, but they're great partners, so I'm gonna be working with them to kind of advocate and get things moving along. And there's different examples across the country where the DOT can be a huge strategic partner. And they are working on some middle mile over, I think, Wolf Creek Pass, just east of, not Poncha, but Pagosa Springs. And so very motivated to kind of extend that connection, hopefully all the way to Cortez if there's enough money for it. So it sets out some goals for interagency collaboration. I won't read all of these, but one of the things that our plan is going to focus on too is connecting community anchor institutions, supporting tourism, broadband in state parks, broadband at state prisons too, and then obviously the tribes. We're working with the tribes right now, and then allocating money towards telemedicine and rural communities. So that's what we're doing right now. And then just so you guys know, I'm gonna be hopefully launching a pre-application process for capital projects funds this spring, early summer, so that I can start to see what you're working on and see what projects we can qualify for that funding bucket. It's only $160 million, so it's not a lot of money, but as you guys know, when you leverage existing assets and partnerships, those dollars can go a lot further. So I want to talk a little bit about our coverage. This is data from the Colorado Broadband Office. We do collect data to update maps, and mapping is key. I mean, we make all of our funding decisions on our data. And so most recently, if you participate in any funding from the state government, you have to submit your data. That's required. And so that your data is actually, we passed some legislation, I'm blanking on the bill, to make your data private. So it isn't going to be subject to open records and all your stuff's in the Denver Post. It's not going to be that. So it's private. It's not open to public records, and so it used to be voluntary, and it's still kind of voluntary if you're not using our funds. But I would encourage you, I know there's a lot of industry out there. If you do have data, for speed data, and you're not participating in our data collection program, I would just encourage you to do that. Just submit your data. Megan from my office, she's really great. We make our decisions based on data. So if we don't have the data, we can't make the best decisions. And I know that people in this room do the same. So if you have an opportunity and you haven't done that, we would just really be appreciative if you did. It's not required, but it's super helpful. But this chart here, I just want to talk about a little bit about what we're seeing in our data collection. It doesn't include all of the state because, again, it's self-reported. But, you know, the good old 25-3 is what I always call it, because it's like really old and not, you can't really set federal policy on that because it's just not broadband. It's really, really difficult. And so I'm encouraged by the federal programming. They upped the requirements so that more areas can qualify. But of our data, we're saying out of all the households in Colorado, 98% have at least 25-3. Okay, so that's good for the data that we collect. We do know that there's people that are they don't have internet, they're not served. And then out of the households, rural households, about 93% have at least 25-3. So I'm an Eagle. My internet is actually not 25-3. It's actually it's 15.00001. It was bad. So, but we had some ISPs move into the area. Because of Thor, because we did open access, carrier neutral location, we actually had a lot of ISPs move in. And now they're providing fixed wireless. So just an example of when partnerships can really help. So now my internet's a little bit better, but I just can't emphasize the partnership enough. But so in addition, so we talk a little bit about the 100 down, 20 up. So out of the data that we collect, all households, 91% are hitting those targets. In the rural households, about 69% of our data shows that communities are getting 100 down, 20 up. That's of our data though. So there's a lot of gaps, and that's why, you know, I say submit your data so we can get accurate numbers. And then 100 symmetrical, this is really hard to achieve, but we're not doing really well on that side of things. For our data, you know, all households, it's around 50%. Of rural, it's 31% of the data that we collect. So we do have gaps, as you guys are aware. And there's a link here. If you guys want me to email this out, I can work with Emily, but there's some links there if you want more information. So we use that data to inform our funding allocation. So I'm going to jump into the capital projects fund, the critical needs. We're working on that right now. The state was given $171 million. Of the $171 million, 8.5 is for administration, so we have roughly $162 million. But basically, these grants are available for middle mile projects, but I'll go over kind of the details. There's three main objectives of the program. It's defined by critical need. We're looking at capital projects where capital assets are directly enabling, you know, workforce, education, and health monitoring. So we're looking at projects that meet those criteria. The other thing that we're looking at as well is to address critical needs. So projects that, you know, are now prioritized because of result of COVID-19. So some of those projects. So and public, you know, so we're looking at, you know, capital projects fund, definitely they want to focus on the effects of COVID-19. And then last, we want to make sure that these projects address a critical need defined by the community and have that project serve the community. So those are the kind of the three main objectives of this fund. And then, you know, so the target is for broadband infrastructure, so middle mile, digital connectivity technology, and then multi-use communication facilities. So those are some of the projects that would qualify for capital projects funds. And then these funds can be awarded to rural electric associations. I know we talked a little bit about some of those partnerships and collaborations that are already existing. So for the REAs out there, we can give money to REAs. Obviously municipal broadband, so local government, nonprofit, and local ISPs. So those are the three main areas that we can give, or the entities that we can give money to, and the types of projects. And the preference is fiber. I know I'm getting a lot of questions about wireless. I've gotten quite a bit of those, and there's probably some lobbying going on to make wireless eligible for federal funds. So the preference is fiber, But if there's a hybrid project out there you're thinking of that uses fiber as well as wireless, we would be interested in reviewing those projects. And then we're also looking at a possible line extension program. This has been pretty successful in the Northeast. It's more of the last mile piece of it, but we're developing those programs right now. And just to give you guys a heads up on our timeline, so the state has been actively working to implement this program for at least a little over a year, a little less than a year. We did submit our application to Treasury in November, and then we wrapped up our grant agreement with Treasury in January. So our biggest deadline is September 22nd, and we have to let the Treasury know what we're going to do with our capital project funds. And so that's what we're looking at. So this summer, you'll probably be seeing a lot of communication from the Colorado Broadband Office on timelines. So that pre-application process, I'll be rolling that out in the next 45 days. We'll do some webinars on it so that if people need assistance filling out the application, I'm going to make it really easy. I know sometimes when you apply for federal funds, at least in my experience, you actually have to hire somebody that knows how to apply for federal funds. And then, you have to keep those people on board to report and do those things. So I'm trying to keep it easy. I mean, I usually stayed away from those grants when I was in local government because it was hard to manage them. But I want to make it really easy, and I've applied for several grants at the state, so I'm targeting different agencies that have better applications. So I'm going to wear that hat as well. And then hopefully we'll make some selections on projects and be able to really award grants probably early 2023. So just keep that in mind as you're planning your projects. And I want to incorporate as much of those as possible. If you do submit a project that doesn't quite qualify, because the federal government has pretty stringent requirements, there's other programs, and I'm going to go into that here in a second. Sorry, so we're not quite an open discussion, but I will open discussion after this slide. One of the projects, so I'm going to just go kind of really quickly through the funding buckets that we're working on right now. So we have state and local fiscal recovery. It's called SLFRF. That is a tongue twister. I've tried to say it 10 times really quickly, and I always screw up, but it's a great program. This was a piece of legislation so the funds came from a piece of legislation, House Bill 21-1289 last year. It allocated $35 million of our ARPA funds, the state of Colorado's ARPA funds, to last mile. And the Broadband Deployment Board reviews the grant applications and gets those funds out. So part of it is $10 million to the Southern Ute and Mountain Ute tribes, so that totals $20 million. And then we have $15 million we're allocating towards the Office of E-Health Innovation for Devices. So that work is going on right now as well. And so it's a good program. We're launching it. It's been a little buggy, I'm not going to lie. Federal funding is complicated. And since this Colorado Broadband Office exists in the Office of Information Technology, the Office of Information Technology is amazing, but they've never really done a grant program. So just bear with us as we're working on getting those funds out the door. Capital projects funds, I already talked about that, so I won't go into too much detail there. We have the IJA funds, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021. I call it IJA. Where we are with that, I believe the Treasury is going to, or NTIA is going to put out a notice of funding opportunity next month. And so, which is right around the corner, so we'll know the parameters of how to implement that program or what the expectations are there. But as soon as we know, we'll start putting our plans together as the state and communicate what you guys can expect in the field on those funds. And then we have the BEAD program, which is great. I think this program is going to be a huge success in Colorado because it's technology neutral. So it's not going to be as restrictive as the capital projects funds or the IJA funds that are going to be allocated to us pretty soon. The state is going to apply to this program. This is a competitive program. Some of the federal programs are just, hey, here's states, here's your money. This one is not one of those, so we are going to make a case for applying to the BEAD program so that the state can allocate those funds. And we're expecting to get around 300 to 500 million depending on this FCC maps. So that's why the data piece is really a big deal for us, because we'll be making those decisions based on the data. I have no idea when the FCC is going to finalize their maps. I think they're a little delayed. And I would guess that just like we have challenges as the state of Colorado collecting data and having it be accurate, I think they're going to have challenges as well. So, but we're going to work with them really closely to navigate that process and you know, reconcile any discrepancies in data so that we can move those funds quickly as possible. So that program, I don't know. I don't have any idea when it's going to be, when the FCC maps are going to be available. So, but you know, this program, it's one of those programs where it prioritizes the underserved. So anything under 25 down, 3 up, the underserved. So anything that's 100 down, 20 up, and then community anchor institutions with under 1 gig service. So those are kind of the parameters of that program. And then there's a couple of other programs out there, the Digital Equity Act. You know, we are doing, so that there's 2.75 billion set aside for that program. I don't, you know, we as the state of Colorado are doing some digital equity programs through our through the Office of Future of Work. And I know there's a pilot program going on in Durango right now to help with digital equity and access. And so that program was awarded grant funding to help train people on technology and so forth. So we're doing a lot of that, and we want to do a little bit more. And then obviously there's middle mile programs totaling about 1.1 billion. It's competitive, so it's to extend middle mile fiber to underserved and unserved and underserved. So those are the buckets of funds that we're managing. Some of them more actively, like the capital projects funds for right now. But we do have waves of funding, and again, you know, our goal is to hit 99% of Colorado by 2027. I do realize there's challenges, but I like ambitious goals. But we're looking for folks like you in the audience to help us meet that goal. So I'm personally really excited about the opportunities in broadband and in rural Colorado. I mean, every community I've been in, the main issue is always broadband, always broadband. So the more we can work together and collaborate, the more we can help solve these issues. And I do think that everybody has a role to play. But so with that being said, I'll open it up this time for real for discussion. But I just want to lead with a couple of questions. I mean, obviously, you know, you guys can throw anything at me that you want to, but you know, we talked about critical needs as defined by your community. So if you guys want to talk about that, but the biggest thing is that we are working to get set up for the capital projects funds and other federal programs. And I'm just curious, you know, is there anything that the state can do to help support you? Because this would be good to know in your efforts to deploy broadband. So I'll leave you with that, and then I'll open it up for questions. Yes.
So I have a couple of questions. When we issue the broadband funding, is there a mechanism to make sure that it was complied to, that the money was well spent, and there was actually an ROI on it? As a taxpayer, I think I've seen that happen time and time again across the United States. Lafayette, Louisiana is a real prime example. They got a lot of money. They built a network. They didn't maintain it, operate it, and ended up failing. Utopia and a couple other ones like that. I'm a telephone company, broadband company. There's no telephones anymore. We just happen to do telephone service. But with that said, some of my funding mechanisms, I have a minimum speed that I have to do, and I'm actually tested now. Of course, I'm sure you know that. Is there any plans to make sure you get compliance with the money that you do divvy out?
That's a great question, and you're absolutely right. There's times where funding, it has great intentions, but it kind of fails in the field because there's no follow-up. So yes, I will tell you that, through this federal funding, we have learned quite a big deal, quite a great deal of what went wrong in the past when we've done these big waves of funding. And I won't mention any programs. I think some of you guys know some of those programs. But we are doing that. So part of our compliance with federal regulations is that we have to do site visits, and we have to document what was built to make sure that what we funded was built. The other thing too is we have to test the infrastructure that was put in. That is a requirement per the federal government. And the good news is that in government, we are not going to try to do that ourselves because we're just not qualified. So we are hiring, we hired KPMG, which is a big consulting firm that has industry experts and federal funding audits and all that. They have really great experience doing that. And so we were going to be using them to help us with that field monitoring to make sure that we're compliant. Because the last thing we want to do is award funds and that happens, and then the state has to pay back the federal government. That would just be a really, really terrible bill to get in the mail, right? So we are paying really close attention to that this time around for the federal funding. Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, good.
You mentioned the capital projects fund would fund middle mile.
Mm-hmm.
Is there also the ability to fund last mile?
Yeah, so the capital projects fund, so the upside to it is we can fund projects so the upside of it is that it can fund last mile, but the middle mile has to connect to last mile to fund.
Sure. That makes sense.
So we're not building dark fiber. So for example, like the CDOT project that's coming over Wolf Creek Pass, there's an unfunded portion of it to come out to this area. What I need is, in order for me to fund it, the middle mile, I have to have a last mile component to it because the federal government wants lit fiber. So it can fund some of that. So if you're a partner, if you want to I told CDOT, find some ISP partners to show that last mile component so that we can fund the whole thing.
But the actual infrastructure for the last mile can be part of the application to be funded.
Probably not the last mile. We just have to see. So I know I'm not answering your question, but you're asking for the last mile to be funded in addition to that, the middle mile.
Correct.
Yeah, potentially. Yes, I think what we'd have to do, I don't want to say no because there's other programs. I think we'd have to probably string some different funding programs together.
Because there seems to be there's a lot of funding for middle mile,
mm-hmm.
but not a lot for last mile.
There really isn't, and you're right. So
and last mile is the biggest challenge.
It is. So what for those types of projects, what I'd like to see is an application that shows the last mile, because as what we can do as a CBO office is identify through different funding buckets what qualifies, because it's not going to be like one funding bucket's going to do the whole thing. So it might be capital projects funds for the middle mile and then BEAD for the last mile. So there is funding, but it needs to kind of be, it's going to be a little hodgepodge how we put it together for funding.
But would that application be submitted then under the capital projects fund?
Yes,
initiative?
It could be. Yeah.
Even if it was BEAD?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one thing I want to say, because I think what will happen with the pre-application, because it's not the application, is I want to start pre-qualifying for different funds. So we're going to focus on capital projects fund, but I also want to see where there might be some last mile opportunities as well. So, and then at some point we'll invite you to kind of officially apply. So then at that point we'll have more information on these federal programs, and we'll start identifying those funding sources or opportunities to fund different portions of these projects.
I'm curious how you're collecting the data on broadband. There's concern that in this area we're being over-reported or overestimated on our coverage and
Mm-hmm.
speeds.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would disqualify or lower the funding opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we, how are you collecting that data, and what can we do to help kind of crowdsource or collect to get a more accurate picture for our area.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I do, when I look at my chart, I know it's not, it's ambitious. I know it's not accurate for the, because we just don't have areas that are reporting. So one of the things that, we collect, just to tell you how we kind of collect the data. So when our Broadband Deployment Board does a grant cycle, we award the funds, and then we do a data collection cycle after each grant cycle. So for the folks that get awarded, you are now required to report your speeds. Now it's self-reported, so there's challenges there, but at least we're getting some data. So we do that twice a year, but it doesn't cover all of the ISPs. And I think there's like over 100 or something like that. I remember somebody said was like 180 or 120 anyway. But what we're probably likely going to have to do for the areas of Colorado that just don't have any reporting is do kind of what, I love the crowdsourcing idea. I might like take that back and like put it on the list of things to do. But we're probably going to have to do specific outreach to different companies that we don't have data for and ask them for their speeds. So that's probably the next step, especially as we work closely with the FCC to get their maps correct as well. So we're going to probably be reaching out in addition to our applications on the data side of things. So if you hear from CBO like, hey, can you send us a list of your ISPs so we can start asking for this data, that's kind of what it's going to look like.
Any other questions? Yes, and we have 10 minutes, so I have one over here too.
So along the same lines, I used to sit on the Broadband Deployment Board, and I think one problem on the board is that we're handicapped by that data set because it is self-reported by the ISPs. And I know the service providers don't like speed testing, but I do think speed testing as another data point is extremely important, because sometimes the providers report their speed at the node and not necessarily, that doesn't reflect at the house, or their speed at the tower. You don't know how oversubscribed the tower might be. And I do think, like, for these rural areas, I think it's really important that speed testing somehow become a component or another data point to just the carrier provided data in order to get an accurate picture of what goes on. Like, because even the cable companies in this part of the state are oversubscribed, so you can get 100 down and 20 up at 10 in the morning, but at 5 o'clock at night when everybody's on streaming, you're way below that. So I do think that another data point would be helpful for the state.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Brandy, I have a question. For Region 9, what specific steps does the state of Colorado want to see in the applications and processes from, in other words, what does Region 9 need to do to enhance our application so we can get a fair share of the state money?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm just going to share some initial thoughts because we're still developing the application. But so we're going to want to see, collaborations. So identifying where you might be leveraging assets, because one of the things the state, we've talked about is like the overbuilding, right? So if you have a carrier already in your area, are you leveraging that existing infrastructure? We don't want to duplicate effort there. The other thing too is we're going to want to know, what type of technology, what type of speeds are you proposing? And I know what's really important to the governor is how many households. Most of the federal programs are focusing on fiber, connectivity to households. So we want to know how many households you're going to be able to provide service to. And that's also in the governor's executive order. So the federal funding buckets are really about, service to households, not like service to, like CDOT middle mile necessarily. So we're going to want to see that. One of the things that I think is going to be important as well is, the sustainability case as well. How do you plan to make sure that this one-time investment continues on? I think, as the federal government's kind of missed the boat a couple of times, several times on that, where we go build things and then they just fall apart afterwards. So we're probably going to want to see that. And then, if there's like a financial component as well, we're going to want to see maybe a pro forma on how you're going to make the numbers, how you're going to make it work. So those are just our initial thoughts, and there's obviously a little bit more that goes into that. But the first step, the first pre-application is going to be, we're not going to ask you necessarily for all of your design engineering type ideas, you know, or your plans, because I think I want to see what ideas are out there first, and then put you through the gauntlet of grant applications, so you're not wasting your time. But those are my initial thoughts, and I think, yeah. So, and we have for the Broadband Deployment Board, the requirements are very similar to ARPA for capital projects. So a lot of those applications will probably kind of lift what we're doing there and put it into a database so that we can get it out to you guys to apply.
Do we have any other questions? I hope someone took notes on her answer there.
We're at City Hall, so it might be recorded, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions? Well, if you do have any questions between now and whenever we kind of communicate on some of these programs, certainly let me know, let us know. We're happy to support you guys. We are staffing up, just so you know, because we're pretty bare bones in our broadband office. And so we have several positions out there, and we'll have some more. So a lot of support coming our way to make sure that we spend this money correctly. That's all I have. Thank you guys so much for inviting me down here. It's been really great. It's not too far away. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much. I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you so much, Brandy. And next, I am going to turn the MC responsibilities over to La Plata County Commission Chair Matt Salka. We have a panel, and if our panelists could go on the dais, they'll all have their own microphone. And we have a mic for you as well, Matt. And then just so you guys know, we will end promptly at 12:30 for lunch, and lunch will be right across the hall. And then we'll have some announcements after this last panel, and I really appreciate your time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Salka, County Commissioner for La Plata County. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces. I've either worked for you or I'm working for you all, or a lot of broadband discussions in La Plata County, so I appreciate you all being here. We'll go ahead and go across the dais here and have you can all do your personal introductions as well, and then we can start off with these 3 questions I have. Thank you. Ms. Kramer.
Hello, can you all hear me okay? Great, so thank you for having me today. My name is Beth Kramer. I'm coming from Silverton. So I am the economic coordinator for a nonprofit, San Juan Development Association, serving Silverton, San Juan County, our Silverton School District, Chamber of Commerce. And I've been in the position for about a year now, working on a variety of different projects, but helping to support the community in capacity for important projects like this, as well as community development and housing.
Hello, my name is Delbert Kaiher. I'm project manager for the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. Began with the FCC 2.5 gigahertz spectrum lease that we got, and just starting to build from there. Thanks.
Sorry about that. Jim McLean, Montezuma County IT Director.
Snuck
snuck in there. I'm Diane Cruz. I'm with NeoConnect. We're a consulting firm, and we work with local governments on broadband planning and implementation. We've been at this for quite a while. We're based in Colorado, but we do work nationally. And so what's great about working nationally is we can see what other states are doing and maybe take some of their best practices. We have worked with 49 cities in the state, as well as about 45 of the 62 counties. So with that experience, we know a lot of the stakeholders, a lot of the people that we need to bring in as partners potentially to get some things done. I'm here on the panel representing the Mountain Ute tribe. I see Bernadette is here. Nice to see you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the tribe is doing, but I would also like to lend some information about some of the work that we're doing throughout the state and best practices.
Hi, I'm Eric Hiddle. I am owner and founder of Echo IT Consulting based in Pagosa Springs, Colorado. In working in IT for various governments, some of which are here. I see Andrea from the town of Pagosa here. Became evident that we needed to work on our broadband and regional broadband kind of outgrowth from that. So I became involved in order for us to have better services within our organizations and at our residences. So the Pagosa Springs CDC is jointly funded by the town of Pagosa and Archuleta County, and they awarded a broadband services manager, or we formed a broadband services manager office that kind of looks at specifically Archuleta County and our needs and working with our ISPs but also looking regionally. And so I ended up working with Jim and Rick and others just all around the state. So I'm representing Archuleta County and the town of Pagosa Springs in that respect today.
Good morning. My name is Rick Smith. I'm Director of General Services for the City of Cortez. I put my first stick of fiber in 1996, so I'm kind of a fiber nut. Work with Jim real closely in Montezuma County. Have the city fiber system that undergoing several changes, and looking forward to the future. And I'm thankful for all of the funding coming down the road to open up once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I'm Brock Johansson, CEO. Went off. I'm Brock Johansson, the CEO of Emory Telecom, a nonprofit cooperative. We're serving some areas around here.
All right, great. Thank you all for being a panelist, as well as it looks like I have two hats today as a moderator as well as a panelist, so please bear with me. All right, so we have 3 questions today that has been sent to the panelists earlier on these 3 items, and there's some subparts on each question. So I'll go ahead and I'll be more than happy to repeat because it's these questions can be a little bit long. But we'll start off with Ms. Kramer and then go down the row, and each panelist gets the opportunity to be able to speak on each question. So our first question is, what are your current projects that you're most excited about, and what part of these projects leverage any local partnerships to achieve improved last mile or local backbone improvements and lessons learned?
I didn't know I picked the hot seat for the first person. So I think, what I'm most excited about is that there has been a recent refocusing of support to small mountain communities like we are in Silverton and San Juan County. And with that, we've gotten a lot of growth in our partnerships with other agencies and ISPs in order to support us. So through that, we've had the ability to connect with groups that are interested in bringing their technology, their expertise, and their capacity to Silverton to help support us in a project that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do on our own. So, I think Corey mentioned earlier about the idea of reliability, redundancy, and affordability. So we're absolutely trying to work on all of those right now, mostly within the town of Silverton, but also expanding that into San Juan County. So having great conversations recently with local ISPs that are interested in bringing out their technology and their infrastructure to the town of Silverton and building out fiber to all of our households. So even though we are a small community and we are less than 1 square mile, we still don't have fiber to all of our households. So that's a really exciting infrastructure development that we hope to see happen this summer. And with that, it'll hopefully increase our reliability. I think as mentioned before with our schools during COVID, many of our students, even though they were located in the town of Silverton, didn't have access to fiber, and we had to come up with other ways to provide them the internet during that time when they were working remote. So on top of that, we're also exploring our our middle mile type projects. So Silverton right now, we have one fiber line that is coming into Silverton south from Durango up through those passes, and then it ends. So we're really looking at how to create a redundancy, and we're hopeful that we can create that project going north into Uray with some interested organizations like SMPA. We've been talking to CDOT and other ISPs that are also helpful in doing that. But of course, even though that it's not too long, not 180 or so many miles, it is pretty crazy terrain to go over. So it will be costly, it will be a complex project, and we understand that we need the support of all these different agencies to help us for sure. So I'm really hopeful in the continued momentum and support that we see to our rural communities, and leveraging our partnerships like today to hopefully connect those, because if we create redundancy for the town of Silverton, that creates redundancy. That creates redundancy for many communities along that line as well.
Thank you. Mr. Caher.
Hopefully I don't speak too fast. I don't do this very often, but for us, my project is for the Southern Ute Indian Tribe is huge. We've started looking at building, of course, our backbone throughout the reservation. So we start from Ignacio, we'll build out to Durango, Three Springs, then we'll go from Ignacio to Bayfield, Ignacio to San Brito, which is towards Arbalise, Allison Arbalise area, and then from Ignacio to what we call as a Mesa Tower. And right now we've started laying line or conduit in the ground, so that's very exciting. And it's just being able to do this and then also help out with hopefully, you know, the airport. I guess they're looking for fiber going to the airport, if we can help build that out or work with them to get it, or just different areas that we're looking at. So we're just with the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum that I stated earlier that we received, we want to, of course, use that and be able to keep that for the whole reservation. That way we know that we own that's ours, and that's a huge deal. So that also helps us out with the wireless side of it. There's quite a bit, and of course I'm nervous up here, so I'll pass it on.
Yes, thank you.
So Montezuma County currently has no projects going, but a couple of things have happened. It's been kind of exciting, I think. When the pandemic happened, I think it was both a kind of an fortunate and unfortunate set of circumstances. Like all of us in this room even, we realized we had an issue in the area, especially for us in Montezuma County. We sent home a lot of employees to work remotely, and out of the 100 plus employees who went home, 26 had no internet. Well, they can't work remotely if they have no internet. And those that did have internet out in the rural communities didn't have enough to connect to the VPN. So we realized that it was a problem, and we got really excited again when the government came out and started talking about the infrastructure package and sending money to the broadband. And so the city of Cortez and Montezuma County took that, and along with our commissioners and our city council, we built a small 6.5 mile project to the south of town that we kind of used that as our, you know, kind of a practice build just to see how it would go working together with the communities. And it went off pretty good. We got it done. And We did that with our own investment. We took no grant money for that. So it was a trial to see how this would go. And now we're just really excited about the possibility of working together as a region, because we know we have to work together to accomplish this. Nobody has the answer, but together we might have the answer. So that's what we're excited about right now.
So the question of what's your favorite project is the one that you're sitting in a meeting with, right? Or who's your favorite child is the one that you're with. So let me talk about the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe project. So the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe applied for 4 grant programs, and they have been awarded 3 of the 4. We are still waiting on the 4th one, but they were awarded grant funding to build fiber from Cortez down to Toyac. And that program was through the EDA infrastructure program, and so we'll be building that project soon. The contracts are in place and we'll get underway. The state is providing a $10 million set aside, and so with that money, they will be building out middle mile infrastructure that goes from Toyac south towards the tribal visitor center, and then the ultimate goal, if we receive the 4th grant, is to extend that south to Ticnos Pass. So we recognize that not only does the tribe have issues with broadband, but the entire Four Corners region really could benefit with additional middle mile fiber. So we'll wait to hear on that 4th grant. One of the grants, in addition to the $10 million set aside, they applied to DORA, Department of Regulatory Affairs, through the High Cost Mechanism Support Grant, and they were awarded funding to build fiber to the premise within Toyac. They also are working on their 2.5 gigahertz wireless network, and so when this is built, they'll finally have very robust, abundant broadband services. Right now they have very pitiful broadband, and most of the homes do not even have 10x1 service. So this will be a game changer for them. They wanted to maintain their sovereignty, and therefore they have set up their own internet service provider, their own communications enterprise. The Ute Mountain Ute Communications Enterprise will be providing internet and data services, voice services to all of the members of the tribe. So when this is completed, they will have gigabit services to all of their homes and businesses on the reservation. A couple of other projects that I'm involved in outside of the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, we are working with Region 10 to build carrier-neutral locations for Mesa County and for Garfield County. And we are about to start working with the town of Delta, the city of Delta, to work on some of their broadband planning efforts. We did write the broadband plan for Southwest Colorado, and so we would love to be involved in updating the plan and putting forward a regional plan for the southwest part of the state. And many of the people, obviously, in this room will be key stakeholders in that process.
I don't know who's running the slides, but I did bring visual aids. So it's Emily. Emily, I'll just, if you can go to full screen, I'm going to get to the one I want. So the first couple slides, you can go pretty quickly through those. Those show back, and there's a thing on the upper left that shows where we were in Pagosa during the scan era, like 2012. And if you get a couple more, it's kind of progression. That shows where we are today. And it not only shows the scan installed fiber, which is in the blue and green predominantly, but it also shows La Plata electric fiber, roughly. Yeah, it's not exact path, but I came close. We'll get that at some point when I get some GIS from Dan. But it roughly shows the path. And where we have kind of focused predominantly up to this point has been on utilizing our scan fiber, making sure all of our anchor institutions, which they pretty much all are now, are on gigabit fiber that's fed from a kind of, we call it a de facto CNL. It's not a real CNL. It's just a rack in the medical center that houses some of the scan hardware, and that all of our ISPs that are local to us are currently present at. So that's Visionary, who Justin's sitting here in the front row, and we also have Zito and CenturyLink. That's all we have. And they're all there, and so we can put bandwidth on that existing fiber. But what we don't have is we don't have redundancy locally. So we have a different terminology that probably confuses everybody I talk to that's not really infused into broadband, that I say local middle mile. And so I have the regional middle mile, which is also middle mile. We need some different terminology, I think. And then we have our local middle mile, because it's still not last mile, but it's, you know, it's also important. So we've identified that years ago, that the La Plata electric lines run east and west, basically roughly parallel to the fiber that was installed along Highway 160. And we've applied just in March for a DOLA grant in cooperation with La Plata Electric to complete that loop. And you can go to the, I think we're on the next line. Yeah, it shows that, yeah, go back one. So from the, this is on the north, so on the west end of town from the hospital, it goes, there's about a mile that needs to be connected on that side, and then a couple hundred feet on the other side. And then also the little pink line that goes from that La Plata line, which is the yellow line that is the substation to substation transmission line that has operational fiber on it, that goes up into Town Hall. So we'll have an alternate path out of Town Hall. We're also applying as part of that same application for a true CNL to be placed on the hospital grounds on the west side, and then we would move some of the quasi de facto CNL equipment out of that and into that true facility on the hospital grounds, making 24/7 access for ISPs, all the stuff that Corey talked about as far as like cameras and monitoring and air conditioning, dual air conditioning and power. And that will also be on the path of anything that comes into and out of Pagosa. So when we have CDOT that comes into the east side, we can already interconnect that even when they're finished. Even if they don't complete onto the hospital, which is 6 miles further, we can interconnect that, and I've already got the plans for that with CDOT to interconnect that from the day it's finished into our network, so we can actually have a feed coming from points east, we'll say, South Fork initially, and then, you know, beyond that. And really a lot of what Corey talked about, I didn't know how it was going to be solved, but that may be the solution that actually happens. And so we're working with that on a regional level to say, well, that might be our way to get to the internet, the network of networks, and that Chris mentioned earlier, is to get over that CDOT fiber that they're finishing the end of next summer. And then we've got that other project to try to get down to Ignacio with the Southern Utes and La Plata Electric as well, and La Plata County that we're, you know, right in the middle of to try to get to the west. And so then we are interconnected on both sides, and we have a way to distribute it redundantly throughout our own local, our own local network as well, and to all both the anchor institutions and incentivizing, and all this is already happening, particularly with Visionary, but you know, it's because they're the ones that have invested in us thus far, to get to the last mile as well. If you go a couple, so that application is ongoing. What our eventual plan is there's a location up to the north of Pagosa called Hatcher Lake, which is in Archuleta County, but there's 600 to 700 homes already built there. They don't have very good communications. They also don't have very good gas, and we had a kind of a crisis with propane over this winter that an opportunity had already been generated with Black Hills Energy that we're actually working on right now to say, well, we don't have any trunk lines going up there, so that line to the northeast going up what we call Piedra Road all the way to that lake at the top there. Well, if we can work with them, we've already gotten plans to do a common trench. You wouldn't think that gas company would be your broadband partner, but in this case, we'll take whatever we can get, and it's not going to be required to go to any kind of state or federal level match, because we're just trying to line up local partners that have the same interests. So we're looking at doing a 6-inch pressurized line all the way up that 5 miles. Along with that, on a different level, put in our conduit, and then we'll be able to work with a last mile provider, and currently that is Visionary, that's stepped up to the plate because they're local and they have all the assets, to then build last mile and gas to a lot of those 600 residences, and there's another about 500 lots that are out there that could be built upon. And Pagosa, if you don't know, like a lot of places in southwestern Colorado, is growing like gangbusters. So they could easily be filled in really soon. And so the HOA is another unexpected partner in this case, where they actually might levy some level of fee to get a dual sign-up for you want gas, do you want broadband, do you want both? And so the county can take some of their ARPA funds and just kind of get the project moving along. I've got an opportunity that just came up where I can maybe get the first mile of that built right away to get to another property. And so it's always just, our eventual goal, and I'll end with that, is to get the loop built from Hatcher on our other major artery that's local down what's called North Pagosa Boulevard back to the hospital, so we complete that loop and we include our water utility. And if you can go one more, and I'll get to where the assessors, maybe it's two more. Yeah, one more than that. Let's keep going, I'll tell you when to stop. Yeah, keep going past that. That's the CDOT fiber, which is important too. But I'm not talking about that right now. Yeah, keep going. There we go. So that is those show our plots. There are our lot lines in Archuleta County derived from county assessor data. And we can see how what we're trying to do is basically encircle and go through the majority. This is 80% of the population of Archuleta County. Some of it's town of Pagosa, but a lot of it's unincorporated Archuleta County. But we will be within a mile or less of 80+% of our population if we're able to build these several loops. And then, of course, the last 20% is the hardest percentage. So as much as we can get done now with the opportunities we have, then we're building the core and backbone infrastructure that when we get later funding that's coming up soon, and we're trying to get it done as quickly as possible because we want to be lined up for when there's CPF funding that comes available, when the infrastructure funding, some of the funding comes available, some of the other stuff that Brandy talked about that I wasn't aware of with the BEAD, and I'm interested in that. So any of those opportunities that come up, if we can incentivize our providers and new providers or whomever wants to do it, and work together, please, that we can get to the majority of our population, because the governor may have a 99% goal of getting by 2027 to get everybody in Colorado connected at 100 by 20 or 100 by 100 or whatever the goal is. But it's not going to happen unless we do this groundwork at the local level to make it happen. So that's what we're trying to do in Archuleta County.
Do you guys still have, what is it, Whiskey Wednesdays?
Unfortunately, not as often as I would like, but I do have a cabinet. I own my own company, and it's not in a government facility, so I have a cabinet full of whiskey. And when if somebody stops by, I don't care what time it is, I am happy to share a glass of whiskey with them.
That's where all the broadband planning happens, right? I'd kind of like to start a little backwards here and kind of talk about lessons learned. 2011, in that time frame, the city began fiber to the home, fiber to the business project. And I have to say, as far as lessons learned, governments are really good at some things and not so good at others. We're good at building roads, infrastructure, but we're not necessarily geared up or have the political will to follow through on a complex thing such as a fiber network. The city has come to kind of a crossroads, and I'm excited on a lot of fronts. One of them being the future redundancy coming into here. Will give us multiple trips or tracks out of Cortez for upstream connectivity. But right now, the city of Cortez, we're in a process of an RFP process. We have 7 bidders that we're interviewing, and the goal all along has been to get fiber to the home for the community of Cortez, and looks like at the end of this we'll accomplish that goal, which is huge. But having said that, we also, as Cortez, for lack of a better term, is a kind of a business hub for Montezuma County. We represent about the city limits, represents about 25% of the county population. We recognize that we also have a role in the whole county. So the partnership with the county on the build going down south was a unique and fun project. So we're excited that for Cortez, we're going to get fiber to the home, it appears, depending on how that flows out. Have no idea at this stage, but that's probably the most exciting thing going on. And then I would be amiss if I didn't say it's nice to see this group, as far as the region, come together and try to solve a problem, because as I said earlier, never before will we have this opportunity to solve these problems for the whole region. So that's exciting as well.
Again, I'm Brock Johansson with Emory Telecom. We're at the cooperative on the other side of the line. So we're over in Utah, and we've solved this problem for southeastern Utah. Everything, if you know the state at all, from Price south to Four Corners, everything off of the two reservations we've already brought fiber to or have funding, and the process is in place that it's going in. We'll have that project done in about 4 years. But a lot of the communities are already fiber to the home, Price, all of Emory, Carbon County. We're working through Moab right now. Castle Valley's done. LaSalle's mostly done. And so we're coming down towards the Four Corners, and we'll take care of southeastern Utah. As we've done that through a lot of partnerships, and it's knowing how all the programs fit together. There's a lot of money out there, and I think we were educated a little bit on some of them here, but we've used UDOT funding, we've used UETN and E-rate funding through the FCC, we've used RDOF, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, we've used state USF funds, we've used USDA Community Connect grants, we've used USDA Reconnect grants, and so we've used that to solve the problem on the other side. We don't need this group on the other side. It's done. It's southeastern Utah. We don't have to have this meeting. So it's kind of nice. So then why am I even over here? As part of that project, we were applying for a Reconnect grant, and we needed a community center to finish out the areas between Monticello and the state line. So we applied for Dove Creek, and we were granted that. And then the rest of the county came to us and said, wait, you left us out. You don't just do Dove Creek. So we went in again, and we met with some of the folks here at Cortez, and we said, all right, well, what we really need is another route, because we already have fiber redundant routes to Denver and to Salt Lake. We were actually one of the partners that built the I-70 route that connects Denver to Salt Lake. We did about half the route, and then our other partners was CDOT and one more big enterprise partner did the rest. And so we looked at this and said, well, we can give redundant routes into Cortez, but we need to get down there. So we applied for another Reconnect grant to do the outskirts around Dove Creek, including up by Egner. And then we also applied to build out all the homes around Lewis, and that got us almost down all the way to Cortez, and then the rest we could just fund. So that project's all permitted, funded, and the crews, I just passed the dozer, it's sitting about a mile from the state line. The only thing we're waiting on some of the build-out's gonna be on Empire Poles, and they're doing make-ready work as fast as they can to let us on. Other than that, that project's full speed ahead. It's already been awarded to the contractors, and we're building it out. So it's really exciting. We're going to take care of the communities around Dove Creek and Egner and all around Lewis, and then we'll get a redundant route down here and connect into 2210, and that'll be good, right? And so that'll give a route out. I know in looking at the maps that were originally populated, that gives another route that comes out, and once we get over to Monticello, we actually have two routes up, and then we can go back to Denver, or we can go on to Salt Lake. We're also working to build to all the schools on the Utah side of the Navajo Nation, and as part of that project, we got up to Aneth, And then it also it's going around to Page, and we're just waiting on a BIA signature. The crews have built down to Mexican Hat, and they're working through Comb Ridge. There's about 2 miles left there. And then we'll go on to Monument Valley around to Page. So that'll give a whole nother south route out. So we're working on that, those projects, and we're excited for, those are all funded and permitted, so they're in the works.
Great, thank you. So for La Plata County, we don't have any current projects as of right now. As you all know, DOLA submittal is this Sunday, so we are working on reviewing a grant opportunity for a CNL to tie in local ISPs to be able to provide better broadband to our communities in the city as well as in the rural parts of the county. The other item too as well is a couple years ago I was the mayor of Bayfield, and I'm not picking on Bayfield at all right now, Katie. So, but I was really short-sighted, narrow-minded on last mile. That's what we got to focus on. Let's take care of our people in Bayfield. And that's totally wrong, for at least in my opinion. And so what we're working on right now is what partnerships can we do in La Plata County, as well as the 3 other counties, Montezuma, Archuleta, Dolores. How can we work on a redundancy? A couple years ago, there was a backhoe that broke into a fiber line that Pagosa Springs was knocked down for quite a while, too long. And so
April 27th.
I'm sorry, what
day.
was the answer?
April 27th, all day.
Yeah, yeah. And I believe 911 communications was down too as well. Changed my thought process on taking care of just the town. And we need to work on closing that fiber gap from Pagosa Springs to Cortez. So that is my focus, is working on closing that gap and being able to partner with anyone, all the above. I'm all ears. Southern Ute Tribe, LPEA, Region 9, Region 10, any way we can help, that's what we want to do. And the other options too as well that we're reviewing currently right now is a shadow conduit policy. So a potential of a cost shared use of being able to put conduit in the ground, post that to be able to have any other businesses out there that would like to help be a part of that project. So it's kind of like almost like a dig once policy, but to be able to have shared costs on being able to put that in. The other item too as well is that potential hopefully partnerships with the Southern Ute Tribe on their Highway 172 fiber line project going from Three Springs to Ignacio. And that would be, we have a brand new weather radar station that will benefit all of us. And to be able to make sure that we have multiple connections to that weather radar station, as well as with the city of Durango to work on high-speed internet for the airport. I sit on the airport board, and the broadband there is horrible, so we need to get that addressed. So partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. We can't do it all by ourselves. So Plata Electric can't. County can't, none of us can. So how can we help one another? Because a win for La Plata County will be a win for all. The other item too as well is just really finding ways to get as much money as possible, as you all are very well trying to do the same thing. But really working close with internet service providers, how can we help them, how can they help us, and that is bringing broadband out to the rural communities of La Plata County. Thank you. All right, so the next item, the next question will be, and I will not pick on you, Ms. Kramer, is you won't be first on this one, but how can your current local projects integrate into a larger regional middle mile effort? What would you most want out of the regional efforts? How do you see remaining ARPA funds, upcoming CBF funds, or infrastructure funding best utilized in the region? I will start off with Mr. Cuthair.
All right. Well, at least this time I think I got a little bit better. But anyway, so with our current project, this is going to help us out tremendously. And the routes that we're currently working on through Ignacio, to all the different areas, Bayfield 160 out to Capote towards Pagosa. If we connect 160 through Ignacio, say we go out to 318 to Highway 550, there's another route out there. From 160 to 550 and down, there's another route that we could use. 172 to Durango, helping out with the different, companies out there, cities, Durango, Ignacio, all of that. So we're looking to expand that, and hopefully by doing that, everything that Region 10 had described with their ring, that we could provide our redundancy and resiliency that, you know, keeps us from losing the same thing. Because we went down too. Somebody hit a fiber line in, I think in Ignacio, or the wind blew down the telephone pole, and it knocked down most of our EMS and all that. So by being able to build that up, that helps us to hopefully get more fiber towards these outlying areas where, say towards Pagosa, if our rangers go out, they lose radio communication as soon as you hit Navajo. So they have to go radio, they're blacked out. They don't have that, so we either have to provide them with a satellite phone or something else. So being able to get this stuff built out, really, it makes a difference. So things like that, partnerships that we can look through, work through, and help everybody. It's not just us. So,
Mr. McLean.
So a couple of things came up. One of the things that I think happens is we all do this. We find ways to think outside of the box, and sometimes that's what you have to do to solve a problem. And so I was sitting around last year, and we were aware our natural resources director has been working on a project I'm sure some of you are aware of called Paths to Mesa Verde. And it's basically a bike path or a bike trail that'll run from essentially Cortez or the fairgrounds out into Mancos. So I went and met with him, and I thought, okay, why can't we work together? Because you have to build a road, and you need to have cameras, and you have to do this, so let's throw conduit in the ground, and let's do it, because we might be able to join forces with our funding. So that was one of the things, it's one of the things we're working on right now. That it's kind of in the planning stages, so we'll see how that goes. And another reason for doing that is because it gives us that other leg out of Cortez, because right now we are all stuck in this area with basically one way out. And if something gets severed, and we've experienced that already in the past, where kind of like Pagosa had happened, backhoe hits it and we're dead. We're just dead in the water. It actually killed the cell phone services and everything for the area. That was a few years ago, but it can happen. And then the other side was piggybacking off what you was talking about with radios and stuff. I was in communications with the CCN, the Colorado Communications Network, who were responsible for most of the 800 mega towers that we have, and they would like to put more in, and the only way to do that is to backfeed them with fiber. So we have to figure out how to get fiber to it. So that's kind of where we're at on that.
I'm just going to share a couple of things. So we're doing this project in California in the Central Sierra region. There's 5 counties that are putting together a plan. But one of the things that they are doing that I think that we should do here is they're mapping all of the local efforts and all of the ISP efforts, and they have a master map, and it's a GIS-based map, and it's public, and it has all of the parcel data on there. It has all of the information that was put together for the study, so things like what are the total route miles for each area, what are some of the smaller projects that have been broken down. We did that by district. We showed all of the unserved households and all of the served households, the number of route miles and the number of parcels that are passed. And so with that information, the ISPs can put together their own individual projects, but it's all coordinated. So as I'm sitting here, I think that that type of effort would be really helpful. I love what everybody is doing. It's great work, everyone, on building out infrastructure. It would be nice to have a master map and one person that is a keeper of the map, if you will, and then have that data available. We could then look at that together as a region and say, where are there gaps? How can we fill it? Who has the resources to put together grant applications and maybe do something a little bit more coordinated? So I think it's great what each of the counties are doing and what each of the panelists are doing. It seems like it would be helpful for the Southwest region to do a similar effort, to just map everything and make it public.
Eric, please.
I would say as far as the monies that I'm going to start from the end and work backwards a little bit. But as far as the monies that are left, CPF grants are upcoming. Infrastructure funds are forthcoming, and we still don't even know exactly how they're going to be delivered, what the strings are going to be attached, and that'll come out. ARPA funding, I don't know. I think maybe La Plata's got a little left. We just pretty much earmarked the last of ours yesterday in Archuleta. So, but it's a contingency. It's a contingency application, and it's contingent on DOLA funding that particular application along with the Southern Utes in La Plata County and LPA. So if it doesn't go forward, we still have that need to go west and to interconnect our communities together, and that's where the regional aspect of any of these local projects, and it's always been my view is like I'm looking at Archuleta County, that's what I've been tasked with, but I'm looking at it from we have to we don't have the internet in Archuleta County, so there's not much place to go unless we have an interconnect out. So it's always been with that regional, state level, national focus. And so if we don't, say, get that particular grant, if it doesn't go forward, oftentimes I have to pivot, both in my, I'm sure all of you do too, in my individual business, as well as partnerships, as well as applications. But I have this end goal, that's what the value of those strategic plans are. You can say, okay, well, this is what we need to get done. What's the mechanism by which we can do it? And funding is always a big part of that, and maybe the biggest hole. And so we're finally getting some of that filled in, where I don't have to figure out how to get strapped local governments that don't have a war chest sitting there for broadband. Now they have a little bit of money, and we can apply them towards these infrastructure projects. So if we don't get that one, I think Corey would probably say the same thing. It's the next thing is well, we'll see if we can fit it into CPF. I mean, there'll have to be more partners that have to be lined up for the application because it has a last mile component, but that's not a bad thing because that's our end goal. So it's always being nimble and being flexible, seeing what we're given, see what partners are really stepping up to the plate. And we've had a lot of good engagement on that thus far, so we'll just continue that. And I think on the infrastructure in particular, and maybe the CPF too, if we can get our base needs done, our local infrastructure and our local middle mile and our regional middle mile, the backhaul, if that's taken care of somehow before we get to the CPF granting from Archuleta County's perspective, before we get to the CPF round and the infrastructure round, then we're really teed up for the last mile component of that, which I think somebody in here mentioned, well, that's the most expensive part. Well, it certainly can be because it's the most mileage. I think it's probably the same in most of the other counties. We're really rocky. We have a lot of underground utilities where there's no poles that you can hang on, or they don't want you to because they're trying to get things underground. So how do we bridge the gap from where it's economically viable for you to, as a provider, to get it out to the last mile to the houses, and how do we, say, okay, well, this is the gap where we can then help with that with our CPF grant, or if that's the way the infrastructure money goes, and then we can work with you to say, okay, well, give us a plan to say, how much does it cost you to get there? What's your gap? What can we do with these monies as a governmental organizations and that are being distributed to us to get this to our end goal, which is the, 99% of the residences and businesses in each of our respective counties.
Thank you.
So some of the things I'd like to see out of this effort is, for Montezuma County, would be a short term would be a loop from Cortez to Mancos to Dolores and back to Cortez to provide a level of redundancy for the whole county. That way, if it's something gets cut one direction, it goes the other, so forth. But looking at that map over there, the RDOF, the lime green is the RDOF winners in Region 9. And the green areas, as a general rule, are probably the most unserved. And if somehow, out of this regional effort, if we can get the RDOF constructed, by default, we will be building a lot of middle mile networks that would connect a lot of stuff all together. And of course, Corey's vision of Highway 160 is paramount. But if you take a look more than just the Four Corners area, if you take a look at Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, and that slide that Chris had on, the digital desert here that we exist in, we're right in the middle of the cross between Salt Lake to Albuquerque, Denver to Phoenix. We sit right in the middle of that digital desert. And the efforts out of this regional piece with others is going to help fill in that gap. So it's kind of, we're faced with an opportunity to really solve some big problems, and exciting.
And I apologize, when I was giving our project, the screen came up on what we're doing. We've shared where we're going to, and you can see by location where we're going. And it's bigger. I think that's the actual Dove Creek, right? And then if you zoom out, it'll go bigger. But we've provided that to Jim and Rick. So, but how we play in the regional, again, I kind of mentioned this, but if we get that route out of Cortez up north, and then once you get to Monticello, there's 2 routes to Denver and Salt Lake. And then if we can come around, we'd like to work with the Mountain Ute tribe, because if they get down to Toyoak and we're over to Aneth, and they're already planning on going down towards Four Corners, I can't remember what that highway is, but they'll go right past us. So we connect that. Then with our project, we've already got fiber over to Page, and so when we connect that to Page, then it's a redundant route out to Salt Lake. But we're also hitting NTUA in Cayena, and that gets you to Phoenix. They've got routes to Albuquerque. So right there, as soon as we can connect to Monument Valley and Cayena, we can connect the Cortez and this quarter with Albuquerque, Phoenix, Salt Lake, and Denver. So we can give you the 4 main metros can haul out on us on 2 separate routes if we can get that connected through Toyoak. So that's where Emory plays. I mean, we solve your redundancy day one. I mean, that's just where it's at. So if we can get you to the 4 metros on 3 different routes, you already have the 1 route out, and then you've got all this other stuff that's being planned. That's fine, that's just gravy. But we can solve that, and it's going to happen. That's all funded. As far as how you solve this, and again, we've solved it on the Utah side, and I'm not offering to come solve it over here. I'm saying that you guys have got to figure out all the programs, because what I'm worried about is if somebody goes in and I don't want to say it wrong because, Brandy, I don't know how to say your last name. Is it Reeder or Ritter? Or she might have left. Okay, the new director, she said you've got a couple programs. That's exactly right. And the reason why a telco can come and solve southeastern Utah, and a telco could do the same over here if they wanted to, but then you guys are all doing it, and so it gets all messy. But if you look at it and you say, okay, what school is available? All right, there's a school over there, so I'm going to get $1 million out of E-rate funding. And then, oh, well, there's an RDOF project, so I'm going to get some to build out this portion of, so let's take a town like Mancos. You've got an RDOF project there, and then maybe you have a school there, so you can get some E-rate funding. Then, as part of, this wasn't mentioned, but the Reconnect program was funded as part of the Infrastructure Act also. So maybe there's a play to get a Reconnect grant there. And then you also say, well, okay, what about a Community Connect grant? And then you say, okay, what about this new state grant program? And then you say, oh, well, Verizon has a tower there, and they will pay this much aid to construction. And AT&T has a tower over here, and they'll pay this much aid to construction. And so you pull all that together, and all of a sudden it makes sense. The problem is if you go out there with 1 foot and you say, okay, we're going to solve this problem, whatever that is, and you're not used to grabbing all those different funding sources and business cases, it just is going to fall flat. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. I think it's just combining all of the grant programs and understanding all of them, both state and federal. And then it's also understanding, okay, where are your enterprise customers? And if you can leverage those, like we knew when we went down to Bluff that we had a ComNet Tower, and we had a Verizon, and we had AT&T, and then we also had the school there, and then we had 3 or 4 hotels, and then all of a sudden you can start making a business case, right? But if you're looking at it from a government just saying, well, how am I going to get the grant money in there, you're probably going to fall short. And you got to combine all these programs. I'll give you one good example, and then I'll stop talking. But we were trying to get to the Monument Valley in Cayena, and we applied, and we were granted to Montezuma Creek. But the FCC said, no, that project's too big to go to Monument Valley in Cayena. So we went and we grabbed some money through a Community Connect grant through USDA for about $3 million in the middle. Then we got some money for a road project, and then we got some, the towers, the UCA, we call it Utah Communication Authority, that's our police radios. They had some money. We coupled it all together. Then we went back into the FCC. The project had come dramatically down. They said, okay, here's your E-rate funding now, right? And so then we were granted the project, but we were denied the project the first time. But when we got 4 or 5 other sources of revenue coming in, plus Emory Telecom found a few business customers that we could connect on the way, all of a sudden, our next application for the grant was for about, I don't know, 60% of what we had asked for the first time. The FCC said, okay, you can have it this time. So it's knowing how to couple all of the programs, not one program, to get the project done.
Can I just say one quick thing? I agree. So one other thing that we did in Minnesota, Stearns County did a plan, and they identified and mapped all of the unserved areas and served areas, and then they did a formal invitation to negotiate process. And they called it an invitation to negotiate process because they didn't want to select one service provider. They wanted to have everybody at the table. And it was also interactive, where they received proposals from the service providers, and then they wanted the mechanism to be able to negotiate and say, we got a proposal where this company is going to build out in this area. Could we shave a little bit off of your proposal and have you invest over here instead? So what they did at the end of the day is the county committed to putting in $16 million of their ARPA funds, and the service providers committed a certain amount and where they would build, and then they put together a grant strategy with an open dialogue with the service providers, and 100% of the county is going to be served with this process, and leveraging grants and the $16 million from the county and from the service providers and their commitment, they're going to build out about $60 million worth of infrastructure. But they put together a strategy, a grant strategy that came out of that effort, and it was, they didn't select one provider, they selected 6 or 7 providers to do the entire county, and it, became this win-win all around for everyone. So they coordinated that effort. So I would recommend, and they did a formal process because they wanted to get proposals back from service providers within a certain date, so that they could put together this strategy and then apply for a state border-to-border grant program that was available in Minnesota. So I think that that type of effort would be really fruitful for this region, is to put some structure around the planning and some structure and commitment around, this is the area that we're going to go after, this is how much money we'll put in, and these are the grants that we're going to go after for that.
And we have about 9 minutes here before lunch, but Beth, I'll let you go next, as well as myself. And then the third question is fairly quick, so it looks like we can make it on time. Beth.
Yeah, and so just kind of reflecting off of the most recent comment, that actually was going to be my ask, and what I want out of these regional efforts is guidance on how to create those programs and funding so that we can leverage our own funds from our taxpayers and our reserves and ARPA in order to create these very strong sustainable projects. And navigating that organization and how we can leverage grants can be a little bit daunting, especially to small communities that might not necessarily have the capacity or persons on their staff that are dedicated to those issues. So that's my ask to our regional summit for that reason. And just with Silverton and San Juan County, as we're smaller communities, our ARPA funds were quite low. So we need to make sure that we're using them and growing them and taking them to their full potential. And that's how we see that we'll be able to do that, is through these matching and leveraging funds. Kind of going back into like our current local projects, how we can create regional efforts. So one of the things that's wonderful about being in San Juan County is not just the mountains, but it's the fact that we're nestled between Region 9 and Region 10. So we have a lot of really great relationships on both sides of that line. And I think when we're creating this redundancy through, hopefully, Silverton up to Uray, that will create both of our districts becoming even stronger and helping to support those in education, our healthcare systems, as a lot of our rural communities rely on rural medicine and telecommunications, our emergency management systems, because the conversations about fiber lines being cut or damaged, we've seen avalanches, mudslides, road closures, animals, all of that happen to us that have knocked out our one line into Silverton and put our community at risk because of that. So we really think that creating that redundancy from Uray into Silverton will not only strengthen us, but it will create a redundant circle within the larger circle. And that will only support us, but also there are other communities like Uray, northern La Plata County, Purgatory, all of those communities that will benefit from having that second line coming into the community.
Thank you. And I won't repeat a lot of this, what the panels have been saying, but I can at least let you all know too as well, is redundancy, of course, working on filling those gaps and on the middle mile, but also working on La Plata County's redundancy as well, Ignacio, Bayfield, City of Durango, and then the rural parts of the county. I've been very fortunate enough for La Plata County to be able to earmark $2.5 million from ARPA funds to be able to go towards broadband. 2.5 is not a lot. It's nothing, actually. But what our goal is, at least to use, is around $2 million to be able to match and maybe grow that $2 million from infrastructure funding, CBF funds, any way we can, or partner opportunities to be able to grow that $2 million to something else where we can focus on middle and then also last mile connections. All right. So the next item is, and please if we can keep it quick here, is if money were no object, what would be your goal for broadband development in your area? Besides lack of funding, why do you think so little has been accomplished with regional efforts in the past, and how could we avoid the same mistakes going forward? And for me, and I'll start it off as well, is if money was no object, we'd have everything that we were all talking about today. The focus would be middle mile redundancy and then fiber to the homes, and then it would be a happy world in the broadband world. Beth?
Yep, I agree. Middle and last mile would definitely be our dreams to complete those out. I think we just saw, again, like capacity and expertise issues in the past of not understanding how we can leverage funds or what we need to do. So again, going back to that idea of excitement around the focus around small mountain communities and what organizations are able to do. And I also think that I appreciate the reallocation of government funding to communities like us versus as we feel that some of the programming that have gone out before we weren't able to apply for.
Mr. Kaiher.
For me, having fiber to all the homes and building out the towers from east to west and being able to, build out our EMS. So no money, that would all be built out that way to provide our telehealth to our elders and, the school kids and everything, online schooling. And then I think that maybe in the past it was just because it's easier to get the bigger communities a little bit easier connection, and now seeing the need is out there for everybody. I mean, just not the big communities, even our little ones, even our, like I'm saying, out towards Navajo and those areas, we've got little communities, but they're still important because they've got council members or they've got tribal elders out there that we have to get connectivity to. So that's my wish.
Well, I think it's real simple. I think as a region, what we've experienced is that, at least in the past, is that every community is like this is my community, I'm gonna work, and I get that because we all care about our own communities, but I think we're finally realizing that it's gonna take all of us to accomplish this. So it can't be a partisan problem. It cannot be a partisan problem. It's gotta be an us problem. So we have to solve it. That's what I see happening.
Let's see, so just real briefly, there's $400 billion available for broadband in response to the pandemic. The last time there was this level of funding, it was $7 billion through the BTAP program. So this is an opportunity that we absolutely need to take advantage of, where this is going to influence many, many generations to come. So let's get our plan together and put it forward, do our grant strategy. Then, and somebody, I think needs to take the leadership role and coordinate all of the efforts, map them, and put together a plan, work together. I'm kind of looking towards what's the next problem. So once we get our plan together and our grant strategy and we go after funding, and we can do the do everything plan, if you will, fiber to the home and middle mile fiber. One of the biggest challenges that we're having in the industry is supply chain and materials and people to actually do this. So I think the next thing that you think about, so you do your plan, do your grant strategy, get the funding, but then you need to, as soon as you submit your grant applications, there should be some planning around how are we going to execute and implement, because we do have some challenges. Material costs have gone up 2 to 3-fold, and it's also really hard to find people that are qualified to build the networks, and they're so stretched thin. They're being pulled in many, many directions. So that's kind of the next thing that we have to be mindful of and try to put some planning around.
All right, Eric, Rick, and Brock, you're going to have, you got like 5 seconds each.
5 seconds, all right.
Yeah, done.
Everything everybody else said. And I think I'm sitting next to Diane, and she put her group put together the strategic plan in 2017, and it kind of talked about that. I mean, what would we want if the money was no object, and you put an actual number against it. I think for Utilization County it was like $63 million to get fiber to the premise of all our residents that currently live there, and it was close to $500 million for these 5 counties alone. So that might as well have been, if money is no object, because it obviously was, and that's why we couldn't do it. But now we're closer than we ever were with the monies that are becoming available. So maybe we can actually apply them correctly, I'll put it that way, which is not government's strong suit, but maybe we can, guide them in the right direction and get these monies effectively applied. So that would be my, money is no object, but have government be efficient. It's a hard thing to do, but we need that to happen and to have it be effectively used and work with our partners. I think that I see a lot of cooperation amongst the region, so I think that's why it might succeed this time rather than before, where we got some money dumped here in 2010 to 2012, and it didn't really have a lot of follow-up. So I think the follow-up and the knowledge in the meetings like this.
That was more than 5 seconds. Rick or Brock, do you have anything else to add? It sounds like we're all on the same page here of coordination, working together, and being able to...
I just want to address real quickly the last part of that question is why so little been accomplished with regional efforts. Prior to COVID, when the COG did away with the technical committee, that killed the local broadband advocate for each board or government entity. So I think the lesson learned out of that was keep engaged with the technical people, that they can be your advocates for the local part of this, for your boards, and because when you get the board members making decisions uninformed, then you really don't get a viable plan as far. So that's just one of the takeaways that I would say. Thank you.
2 things. The first is that we're not talking $4 billion, we're talking $42.5 billion. Yeah.
400 billion.
Well, it's
There's
the 42
400
on
billion.
the BEAD. So on the BEAD program, it's 42 because a lot of the 400 is going to go to other infrastructure projects. But the BEAD program we're talking about is the 42 billion. Your broadband office, our broadband office, is going to design that program. We need to be involved in that. So each state, let me make that clear, each state submits a plan on what type of program they want to run. NTIA is not going to tell them how to do a broadband grant. Colorado's going to have their own broadband grant program. If you're not involved in how that's written, you're going to be left with whatever they write. And so this group's biggest efforts should be talking to the broadband office, deciding what your broadband grant program is going to be like. That's the number one thing here, because you don't know what the requirements are. You don't know who's going to be eligible. You don't know what speeds and how much, like, are they going to give preference to fiber? Are they going to do this? So first thing is, the money is coming through the state, and the state is going to submit they're going to have to elect by July, then they're going to get a couple, I think it's $5 million to write the plan. Is that right, Diane?
I think it's 8.
Okay, whatever it is, they're going to write the plan. You've got to be involved in that. People are already talking to them right now. So start right now. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, again, what Diane said, it's about coordination. I'll tell you that there was another round of Reconnect applications due in March. I did not apply for $1 down here again because I'm scared of this group. And that sounds bad, but I want to be honest with you. As a business, I could have gone in and applied for more money in southwestern Colorado. I've already been successful on 2 Reconnect grants. I didn't apply this year because I don't know what you're going to do, and I'm scared about it. So I'm just telling you from a business standpoint, I would have built out more, but I'm afraid I might get overbuilt, or that you might supplement somebody over the top of me, so I didn't apply. I'm just putting that out there. I've got 2 successful grants for Dove Creek, Edgar, Lewis, and there's other areas here, and I told my staff pull all stuff off southwestern Colorado, not because I don't love you. I love you guys. I really do. I just am scared of what you're going to do. So if you want to excuse us, you're going to excuse us here, and we're going to leave. We're all nervous about what you're doing, so we're not applying for anything.
Well, thank you very much, Brock, on that item. And the panelists should be here during lunch, so if you need to talk to them, please do. Thank you all for being a part of this.
I appreciate, Brock, I appreciate your comments. I got to sit down with Brock, and Utah's doing amazing things, and we could learn a lot. So lunch is next, but apparently Cortez is the hotspot for lunch at the city, so there is a room that was double booked. That is not your lunch. Our lunch is out in the atrium. It's box lunches, so you can eat out in the atrium. There's tables, or you can bring it in here. And then I want to thank all of you again for attending. Those of you who are government technical folks, because we've got to get our ducks in a row, we are meeting afterwards at the service center. And those of you who are not government technical folks, we have another regional broadband meeting in 2 weeks, and we will provide an update on everything at this forum. And then we will also be scheduling a meeting with ISPs at a later date once we know what we're organized on. So please have lunch, please network, and please, if you are not on the list for the regional broadband meetings, see Emily, and she will add you. Thank you.